Music Won't Pay the Bills, an autobiographical journey through the ups, downs, and all-around thought process of an aspiring musician. Written by Goldy, Jr. Narrated by Mike Chadwick. Chapter 1. The Infection. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was around 8 years old, sitting in my living room in Madison Park, New Jersey, listening to my older brother Steve play piano. He was playing and singing some dramatic song. I think it was Just Once by James Ingram or something in that genre. My parents had just separated, and my dad had moved across the country to Las Vegas. I think that's why the music had such an emotional effect on me. It made me really sad, and I even broke into tears. I remember my brother looking back as he was playing. He asked me if I was crying. Of course I said no, and just calmed down and listened to the music. Looking back, it all makes sense now. I was an 8-year-old kid in the middle of a separation, and the dramatic music just brought out those emotions. That was my first memory of the power of music. To this day, some 37 years later, music still has a similar effect on me. It was right around the same time period that I started really being drawn to music. I was really into sports as a kid. I played baseball and basketball all the time with my dad. With him gone, my older brother Steve was usually the one watching me. Steve loved music, so as I got exposed to more and more music, I began to love it as well. One day around that same time period, I heard Steve blasting something down in the basement. I hurried down the stairs to see what was going on. He had a microphone plugged in through this big home stereo. Everyone had these in the 80s. And he was singing along with The Ripper by Judas Priest. Once again, I was completely hypnotized by this sound, and it brought out another emotion in me. It was so heavy and intense for the time. It all just sounded so cool, and I felt a complete rush of adrenaline go through me. I wanted to try and sing too. I wanted to know how they made those sounds on guitar. The music switch in my brain was officially clicked to the on position, and just like that, I was a lifer in the music game. The next 6 months was a musical awakening for me. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and with my parents being newly separated, there was a lot of time for my older 16-year-old brother Steve to throw parties and have jam sessions with his friends while my mom was working swing shift at the restaurant. Steve is the closest in age to me, but he is still 8 years older than I am. When I was older, I used to joke with my parents and ask them if I was the mistake by the lake. My dad would laugh. My mom, not so much. Anywho, I was 8 years old and had a front row seat to parties with 16 to 20-year-olds partying, jamming, playing poker, and most importantly, blasting a lot of loud rock music. I remember a lot of stuff, like Judas Priest's British Steel album, and at the end of the night, a bunch of Steve's friends getting all sentimental with each other when a song called United would play. There was a steady stream of Judas Priest, the Scorpions, AC/DC, and the song that really made me appreciate lead guitar playing, a little ditty from Lynyrd Skynyrd titled Freebird. If you're one of the few people on the planet that has never heard it, there's a very long guitar solo at the end of the song that is quite legendary. It really made a very long-lasting impression on me. The next year or so kind of went that way. I was basically a third grader with a love for playing sports and listening to hard rock music. I had 2 decent friends that lived on my street, and my house seemed to be judged by the neighbors as the rowdy place on the block. Looking back, it was probably a fair assessment. My mom and dad started to reconcile their differences and decided they were going to get back together again. This was great news to me. I missed my dad dearly and thought them getting back together was a great idea. All the way up to the point that they told me we'd be moving to Las Vegas. I was 10 years old, about to start 4th grade, and was fitting pretty good into my own skin. I couldn't fathom that we were moving, and especially to Las Vegas. Living in a small town in New Jersey, Las Vegas seemed like a fictional place. I thought there'd be nothing but rich kids and cactus. This was 1983, and I couldn't just jump online and check it out. They told me how great it is, that it was surrounded by mountains. I was 10. I didn't give a rat's ass about mountains. When it was all said and done, believe it or not, my parents didn't let my 10-year-old bitching and moaning stop their plans to head west. Steve headed out there first and signed up for school. He lived for a few months in an apartment with my dad. Then my dad flew out, packed up some complete piece of shit car that he won in a poker game. Along with my mom, the three of us drove across the country to Las Vegas. Looking back on it now, that was really some crazy shit. Imagine being split up from your spouse for around 2 years, packing all your stuff up into a car that looked like it wouldn't make it to the state line, much less across the country, and starting off your new life with a 3,000-mile car ride and your bratty, pissed-off 10-year-old in the back seat. My mom was truly an angel, R.I.P. Amazingly, we make it to Vegas, and it was a culture shock for me. It was nighttime when we drove into Vegas, and the skyline was unlike anything I had ever seen before. There was a seemingly endless display of colorful neon lights and buildings. My dad immediately started selling me on the huge video game arcades that most of the casinos had, and told me he would take me to the one at Caesar's Palace soon. I couldn't wait. Starving from the long ride, we went out to eat at a place called Mississippi Ribs. In New Jersey, whenever we went out to eat, it would be a kid type of pizza place or a Jersey diner. So you can imagine my surprise when the waiter showed up with a bowl of warm towels to rest my hands in. I just went with the flow and figured it was a Vegas thing. I've lived in Vegas for 35 years now, and that only happened one other time I can think of. That meal gave me a very wrong impression of what my first day in a Vegas school would be like. After taking a few days to get settled in to Unit 273 at the Cameron Apartments on Sirius Road, it was time to start my Vegas scholastic career. I was going to E.W. Griffith Elementary School, which I believe was kindergarten through 5th grade. I was expecting to be the cool blue-collar Jersey kid amongst a bunch of the casino owners' rich, wimpy brats that would worship my mad basketball shooting abilities and complete destruction of any baseball thrown anywhere near my bat. I found out in about 2 minutes that my hypothesis had more than just a few holes. The school population was much more racially diverse than Madison Park, and I was a stranger in a strange land. Everything was much different, and I missed my friends in Jersey. There was a flag ceremony on my second day of school, and the entire school was marched out into the school courtyard to say the Pledge of Allegiance together. Yes, that really did happen in 1983. As the ceremony was ending and we were going back to our homerooms, I was talking to some girls when I was rudely interrupted by some kid that said I talked like a retard. He was referring to my Jersey accent, which I was unaware of at the time, so I did the first thing that most Jersey kids do when faced with such disrespect. Without hesitation, I punched him straight in the face, tackled him, and did the best 1983 version of ground and pound that my 10-year-old body could produce. Teachers were pulling me off of him, and I was yelling a lot of inappropriate and profane things at him. It's probably not a good idea for anyone to say the things I was saying, and definitely not a 10-year-old, especially seconds after a flag ceremony. They escorted me to the principal's office and called my parents in to come pick me up. I remember them lecturing me, but not too badly. I was always taught to defend myself and not to take any shit from anyone. I was screaming about hating Vegas and how I couldn't wait to go home. Typical 10-year-old stuff. I remember driving in the car with my parents, and there were a few songs that were always on the radio at that time. Hall & Oates' Man-Eater, Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, and the Jackson-McCartney duet Ebony and Ivory. I didn't like them, and still to this day when I hear them it will take me back to that time for a moment, and it's always a weird vibe for me. It's that power of music thing again. Out of the Vegas darkness came a light one night when my dad came home from driving a cab for 12 hours. He asked my brother if he still liked the band Kiss. I had Kiss trading cards when I was still in Jersey, and I loved the look of them, but really never listened to their music. This was before they ever took their makeup off, and nobody really knew what they looked like without it on. I was really confused why he was even asking this question. My dad had absolutely zero interest in our hard rock music obsession. So my brother said something to the effect of, "Yes, I like them," and asked why. My dad explained how he picked up a young couple at one of the Vegas hotels earlier today, and the woman kept saying to the man, "Aren't you going to tell him?" After she said this 4 or 5 times, my dad decided to bite and asked, "Is there something I should know?" The man then asked my dad if he had ever heard of the hard rock band Kiss. My dad said yes, and that his kids loved the band. The woman then told my dad that her boyfriend was Eric Carr, the drummer for Kiss. My dad had celebrities in his cab often and wasn't the type of guy who cared much about these types of things, but he was polite and said, "That's really great," and whatever appropriate things someone would say in that situation. Eric Carr then asked my dad if his kids would like to go to the show at the Aladdin the next night, and if yes, he'd leave us tickets and backstage passes. My dad said yes, and to please tell him right now if this was a prank, because if it were, it would be heartbreaking to us and a huge waste of time for him. Eric was very respectful and convinced my dad it was all on the up and up. So the next night, off I went with my big brother to see my first live hard rock concert at 10 years old. I was pretty psyched. My brother explained that there was an opening act, some new band called Motley Crue. The lights went down, the crowd started cheering, these four guys jumped on stage, and I was pretty amazed. I loved the whole atmosphere. I didn't know the songs, but the feel of the event was unlike anything I ever witnessed to that point. By the time Kiss played their last note of the night, I couldn't wait to do this again. We never did use our backstage passes. My brother was talking to some girls and was more interested in the potential of that situation than meeting the band. I didn't really care either. It was more about the event itself to me. My dad picked us up a little bit later, and he was very happy that we enjoyed it so much. I was very sad when Eric Carr passed away way too young in 1991 of cancer. People always mentioned what a great guy he was, and I always remembered that he was so cool to my dad, who was simply driving a cab. In his own way, that little gesture made me appreciate music on a much higher level. It may have been years before I went to a concert without that happening. It was about this time that my brother Steve introduced me to one of his Vegas friends, who was also named Steve, and to his little brother, Aaron. Aaron was 14 and I was 10, but we immediately hit it off and became great friends. He was like a second older brother to me, and when Steve moved back to Jersey, Aaron definitely stepped into the big brother role for me. We both were influenced by our older brother's musical tastes and started listening to everything that was hard rock and metal. There was a big explosion of metal bands at that time, and we were listening to Rats Out of the Cellar, Quiet Riot's Mental Health, Iron Maiden's Power Slave, and all kinds of obscure stuff that we could find. I used to get Metal Edge, R.I.P., Circus, and Hit Parader magazines, and just try to find music on any band in there that seemed cool to me. As great as modern technology can be, I'm grateful that I didn't have the internet as a kid. I really think the lack of information made you appreciate things more when you found something you heard of. You couldn't just hop online and listen to the latest band people were talking about. Sometimes it took months or even a year to track down a bootleg cassette of some indie band you were interested in. When I would receive a new cassette or vinyl album, it was like a mini event. I would check out the artwork, read all the content inside, and listen to every song religiously until I got my hands on something else. It was a fun part of being a music lover that I believe a lot of kids that were raised with the internet miss out on. One day I came home from school and my mom had gone to the store and bought me a new dresser. On top of that dresser was a brand new huge ghetto blaster. For my younger audience, a ghetto blaster was basically a portable home stereo. You would carry them around, and they were usually really loud, with AM/FM radio and dual cassette players, so you could record one tape to a blank tape and make a bootleg copy. It was like the first version of Napster in a way. I was stoked, to say the least. Now I could really blast some music, instead of using my crappy Sony Walkman with the orange headphone covers that ate batteries up all the time. I don't know how it came to be, but for the first few days I had the Ghetto Blaster, the only cassette I had was the album Keep It Up from the band Loverboy. They're not a bad band, but for me it was like I had a Ferrari, and there was nothing but gravel roads around. I quickly started a collection of great hard rock metal cassettes, decked out every square inch of my room with rock posters, started growing my hair long, and I was on my way to a lifetime career of what most of society labeled as full-on stonerism. Chapter 2. The Sickness. A lot of things started changing for me during the years of 1985 and 1986. After 2 years of hanging out with Aaron and pretty much consistently bitching about wanting to go back to Jersey, in one conversation, he made me realize that wasn't going to happen and that Vegas was now home, and my friends here in Vegas were my new best friends. It was weird because I was obsessed with the notion of going back to Jersey, and just like that, I didn't care about it any longer. My 12-year-old mind thought that what he said was logical, and I just went with it from that day forward. Vegas was officially my home, and still is to this day. So now I've had a good solid year or two under my belt of collecting hard rock metal music, clothes, memorabilia, and anything else related. I went to a few more concerts, including Rat, and one of my favorites still to this day, Iron Maiden on the Powerslave tour. Being that Aaron was now 16 and my best friend, most of his friends were my friends. So at 12, I was hanging out with 16 and 17-year-olds. That led to me getting into a lot of things at an earlier age than most kids would have. I don't want to get into all of the juvenile delinquent stuff that went on. That's literally another book for another day. I'll sum it up by saying we were pretty bad, but not really bad. I was at a crossroads between lifetime loser and productive part of society. One push in either direction would have easily been the difference between me having a terrible life that most likely consisted of being in and out of correctional facilities and rehab centers, or a push the other way that would keep my options open to where the sky was the limit. Luckily for me, it was a simple trade between my friend Tim and I that would prove to be a very important part of my life. I was at his apartment one day, and he had acquired an old piece of crap electric guitar. Although I loved music, I had never given much thought to playing it myself. I thought back to my brother's jam sessions in Jersey, and playing music seemed very hard to me. I think the guitar had 2 strings on it. I picked it up and started messing around with it. I hit a few notes that sort of resembled a song, and I thought it was really cool. Somehow Tim and I agreed to trade my bike for his guitar, and I walked home with it. I remember messing around with it for a few days, and that led me to take a walk to the nearest music store and check out the guitars they had. The store was called The Music Hut, and it was on the corner of Decatur Boulevard and Desert Inn Road. A funny old man named J.B. Wilson was the owner. I was amazed when I first walked in there. There was a surge that went through my body looking at all those guitars. It was a small store, but there were still probably 50 guitars of all makes, models, and price ranges there. I would look at all of them, and JB was always cool about me trying them out. One day I was there and heard some amazing guitar playing going on in the back room. I asked JB, "What is that?" He said, "That's Kevin, our guitar teacher." I said, "I didn't know you gave lessons here. How much are they?" I went home and begged my parents for cash to start taking lessons. After some lectures about not wasting the money, they agreed to let me take 1 lesson a week. So I went down there ASAP and signed up. I walked into the back room for my first guitar lesson and introduced myself to Kevin. He must have been in his late teens or early 20s, tall, kind of lanky, and had long, dark hair. He pretty much looked the part of a hard rock musician. I don't remember exactly, but our conversation pretty much went like this. I wanted to learn how to play songs from Iron Maiden, Anthrax, and so on. He asked me, "What do you really want to do with guitar? Do you want to learn how to play a few songs, or do you really want to know how to play guitar?" I said, "I want to be able to really play like I heard you play the other day." I don't remember if it was right then or maybe my next lesson, but at some point my lack of interest in the technical part of playing frustrated him a bit, and he went off on this 45-second solo of just pure badassery. Then he said to me, "If you want to do that, you have to do this first." He played a simple scale that had 0 amounts of badassery in it. I was definitely confused. I just couldn't understand how that simple scale turned into that awesome solo. Luckily for me, Kevin was an outstanding teacher and started explaining the whole thing to me. He showed me by playing it one way and then playing it to its full potential. Then I saw the light, as they say. It clicked, and I understood the importance of knowing what I was playing, and it helped me out in a huge way for the rest of my musical journey. It was Music Theory 101 for the most part, and I took an interest in it. Without getting too technical about it, for those of you who aren't musicians, there's a language for music. Although it's not necessary to know it to play an instrument, even to master one, it is very helpful to have at least a decent understanding of what notes you're playing, what key you're in, and how it all works together. I took Kevin's advice, and I started plugging away on musical scales and finger exercises. I studied the notes, chords, and modes. He explained to me how to properly pick each note, and how to get some of the cool sounds that my guitar heroes had. He was an excellent teacher, giving me a great mix of musical wisdom, with enough bells and whistles to keep my 13-year-old mind full of excitement about learning and practicing more. The next few months I would go to school, hang out with friends, but any other free time and not-so-free time was spent in my room playing guitar. I knew some other guys that were learning to play. There was one guy in my apartments that was in his 20s. He used to jam in his living room with the blinds open. I knocked on the door one day and asked him if I could watch. I forget his name, but he was a really cool guy and played pretty well. He wasn't good like Kevin, but he knew a lot of songs, and he thought it was great that I was learning to play at such a young age. Looking back on it now, there were a lot of older guys in my apartment complex and neighboring complexes that liked the music that I liked. They were all nice to me and supportive of my guitar playing. I remember my next-door neighbor, Casey, turning me on to Queensryche's first EP, and my buddy Jason Kim constantly trading all kinds of obscure stuff with me. There was a southern clean-cut guy that would always walk around with a guitar, and we would jam a lot together. He would play popular songs, but instead of playing chords, he would figure out the vocal melody and mimic it on guitar. I would ask him if he knew a particular song, and he would say yes, then play some sort of Muzak version of it. I remember Mark, who was an older kid, probably a senior in high school. He was a really clean-cut black dude with glasses. He looked like he'd be a med student or something. He would always carry around 3 or 4 Guitar Player magazines and start playing songs reading from the tablature for the music they provided. He would often lend me one of the magazines and say something like, "Go practice this and I'll see you in a few days." I didn't realize it at the time, but what a cool time that was. And what a great environment to get into music and guitar playing. Like I mentioned earlier, it was hard to hear new bands and learn new songs. You had to figure it out yourself or know someone who could teach you. Everyone would know the same songs, and it was a big deal to bust something new out at the music store. Great times. I ran into a weird problem about 6 months into my guitar playing. I probably had taken 20 lessons by now, and I knew the notes I was playing. I was ripping through some of the scales pretty well and playing some of the songs that Kevin and others taught me. The problem was, once my guitar went out of tune, I couldn't retune it. Some musicians are just born with it. You give them an instrument and they take to it like a fish takes to water. They can hear everything and sing in perfect pitch. It's natural-born talent. Unfortunately for me, I possessed exactly 0 natural-born talent for music. I just couldn't hear how the guitar was out of tune. Kevin would explain it and tell me how to do it and what to listen for, but it just didn't click for me. It would make songs and scales I was playing sound like shit, even though I was playing them pretty well. My mom had a great ear for music and a beautiful voice. My dad had a great love for money and not wasting it. Between the two of them, they had somehow come to the conclusion that my teacher, Kevin, wasn't doing a very good job if I still couldn't tune my guitar after 6 months. I don't recall the exact ultimatum they presented, but it was something to the effect of, if I can't tune my guitar on my own by X, they would quit paying for my lessons. Ironically, right around that time, my musical ear finally formed, and it just clicked on. I could hear the difference and tune the guitar myself. Even much cooler to me, I started to figure out songs on my own just by hearing them. That was a big moment for me, and had taken me up a very important notch in my musical journey. So, the lesson funding from my parents continued, and my practicing became even more intense. I was determined to be a good guitarist. I kept on practicing everything I knew so I'd be cleaner and faster. I couldn't wait to learn new songs and techniques. I just doubled down on everything music-related. My hair was longer, I had more rock posters, cassettes, and clothes. I wanted to start a band and be a rock star. The cool word for guitar back in the day was to call it an axe. "Dude, check out that axe!" Or, "You need a new axe!" were phrases that I said often and which were said to me as well. It was just a part of life, and being that I was still playing that piece of shit axe that I traded Tim my bike for, it was time for an upgrade of my axe. The Music Hut had all kinds of cool guitars, but they were way out of my price range. If I remember correctly, it seemed like they were always at least $350 and up, which was a lot of money for a 13-year-old kid then. An added bonus to my lessons with Kevin was I could always use a store guitar while taking the lesson. The Music Hut was also my second home. I would be there for hours some days just practicing and playing all the different guitars. One day, JB was really pissed off because a beautiful red G&L guitar had scrapes all over the back of it, and I had a crazy leather spiked belt on recently when I was playing it. He accused me of doing it, and I really wasn't aware of it if I did, but I told him that it was definitely possible, and that I did unintentionally do it. He was surprisingly nice about it and didn't charge me anything. I think he limited me from playing the nice guitars for a while. I was pretty happy with the way my guitar playing was going, and my hard rock metal look was coming along. My hair was growing out pretty long, and my collection of rock tees was getting pretty serious. However, something was missing. I didn't feel complete. I was playing songs like Flight of Icarus by Iron Maiden and Last in Line by Dio, but I didn't have a proper axe to represent myself with. Everyone remembers the day they bought their first real tool for the craft they were interested in. It might be an expensive pair of Air Jordan sneakers for an aspiring basketball player, or the first dirt bike for a motocross kid. Well, for me, it was a red Arbor Flying V axe on the Music Hut wall. I remember it well. I walked into the Music Hut like any other day, but right away I noticed this blood-red Arbor Flying V guitar. I was immediately attracted to it and went straight over and picked it up. It was really super light. Not a good sign when appraising guitar quality, but I was too young to know better and wouldn't have cared even if I did know better. I immediately picked it up and started playing it. It felt like an extension of my own body, like an added limb I never knew I had, but once it was attached, it made perfect sense. There was a price tag attached on a little tag hanging from a string around one of the tuning pegs on the neck of the guitar. I was already mentally getting myself ready for a disappointing price that would be seemingly unattainable to my jobless 13-year-old wallet. But, to my surprise, the cost wasn't even half of most guitars in the store. And I asked JB 3 times if it was correct. He started to get frustrated after the 3rd time and said that he would charge me more if it made me feel better. I think it was around $150, and without even talking to my parents, I asked JB about a layaway program. The word no from my parents was no longer going to be an option. There was no chore I wouldn't do to earn the money for this axe. I knew there were many guitars, but this one would be mine. Chapter 3. The Outbreak. A few months had passed since I walked out the Music Hut door the proud owner of one blood-red Arbor Flying V axe, and I felt inside like nothing could stop me from my rock star destiny. I was playing better and better, making major progress, and even surpassing some of the older guys that I was jamming with and getting tips from. I was starting to teach them things, and they were all very supportive, as always. I can't remember when my lessons ended with Kevin, or even why. Maybe he moved away or something, but if my memory serves me correctly, I was done taking lessons from him at this point. I would still take lessons occasionally from other people. I remember Kevin's friend Dave, who was a great guitarist. He gave me a lot of great tips, and a few years later, when I was a pretty decent guitarist, I took some advanced lessons from a guy named Terry who played in a local band called Sabre. He taught me a really great piece from a movie called Crossroads. Not the Britney Spears movie, LOL. And I played that piece to warm up for years and years. I was still very thirsty for guitar knowledge and strived to be better. I was starting to play around with original ideas, or guitar riffs, as we call them. I started getting really interested in writing my own songs and my own guitar solos. It was the formation of what would become my best musical endeavor, songwriting. I remember as early as 6th grade, and before I ever picked up a guitar, I started hearing songs in my head and would try to write lyrics and form songs out of them. I had no musical ability at all yet, but those original song parts would pop into my mind from time to time. Now that I could play pretty well, that gift was starting to turn into something tangible. The first real song I ever wrote was put together in that fashion. It was called Rock and Roll Army. I know that sounds pretty cheesy now, but in 1985, it was pretty much right in line with the hard rock genre. The idea for my first big rock anthem chorus was ringing in my head for a few days. We want you for our rock and roll army. We want you to join the force. The United States military had a big recruitment campaign going on at that time. It had a really cool animated Uncle Sam pointing straight at whomever was looking at the poster, and it read, I want you. So my song was a little play off of that. I started trying different things on guitar to fit with that vocal, and then different riffs and lyrics to make up the verses. I eventually had it put together into a whole song and was pretty happy with it. It was my first time of having that feeling of creating something out of nothing, just a random idea that started as a jingle in my head. Aaron had started taking bass lessons at the Music Hut at the same time I was taking guitar lessons from Kevin. His bass teacher was a really cool guy named Tony. He eventually went on to play with Lenny Kravitz. Aaron and I always intended to start a band and become rock stars together. We both were growing our hair out long, buying all things metal, and just trying to learn everything we could. Aaron and I would have our own little band practices that would consist of us in one of our bedrooms with little practice amps, messing around with whatever we were learning at the time. Rock and Roll Army was our first song, and we would sit and practice it with our friend Chris doing his best to sing it. It was great, that first part of feeling that power of music, but was something we created. I remember really feeling like I was a part of something, and that I had a leg up on other kids that weren't in a band. We had no drummer and could barely play, but we had an original song. A lot of people will go their whole life without ever being able to say that, or know what that feeling is like. You can't buy that. You have to create it yourself. It was during this year that a person popped up into my life that would prove to be a vital part of my musical journey, as well as a great friend. However, the way it started out made the odds of us ever being friends very unlikely. It was 7th grade at Cashman Junior High School. I was well into my long hair having, metal loving, guitar playing, parachute pants wearing, concert shirt rocking existence, and the girls seemed to like me a lot. That didn't suck at all, but it did bring a few haters around. The occasional jock would call me a girl, and sometimes I would get mistaken for a girl when I was out having dinner with my parents. I guess I just had a very young-looking face. My dad used to love to bust my balls about my long hair and call me Danielle and that type of thing. I didn't give a rat's ass. Girls liked it, and I liked girls way more than any of the haters, including my dad at that point. Plus, having long hair was an absolute must if you wanted to be a professional hard rock metal musician in that era. Looking the part was as important as playing well in that genre. Rob Halford from Judas Priest is the only successful short-haired metal musician that I recall from that time, and he's arguably the best metal vocalist ever. The next person that would call me a girl really pissed me off. It was like when one of your own turns on you. I thought me and this dude I never met before had a bond through music. He looked like one of my people. I expected jocks and mainstream idiots to say stupid shit, but not this dude who has long hair and wears Dio and Motley Crue shirts. There was an unwritten bond between metalheads, similar to how two motorcycle riders that don't know each other will throw a thumbs up to each other while driving by. It's a brotherly love that says, you and I fight the same battle, and we know what the others don't know. Then one day in the cafeteria while I was talking to my buddies Bo and Joey, this guy asked me if I was a guy or a girl. Robert looked like the bully in every coming-of-age movie ever made. He was chubby, stocky, and kind of short, but still could be kind of menacing when he wanted to be. I never thought there was anything intimidating about him until I saw his reaction when I told him something to the effect of, "Go fuck yourself, asshole." He said something like he would kick all three of our pussy asses. And if you knew Bo and Joey, you would understand how it was literally divine intervention that punches weren't thrown at that exact moment. It was nothing short of a miracle that no punches were ever thrown at all over the incident. Some time went by and Robert would give me the stink eye. One time he even intentionally bumped into me when I was drinking from a water fountain. I remember thinking to myself that I was really going to have to kick this dude's ass eventually, and I thought without a doubt that I could. Luckily for me, that day never came, and somehow we eventually became friends. Robert explained to me that someone had paid him $5 to ask me if I was a boy or a girl. And knowing how I know Robert today, that's hilarious and not surprising at all that he was up for it. I learned after watching Robert destroy a known bully in the hallway one day that my assumption of being able to kick his ass was way off the mark. Whew, definitely dodged a bullet there. So somehow we eventually got around to talking about music. Robert was talking a pretty big game about how he played drums, bass, and guitar. I naturally doubted this and told him I wrote a song and that my band needed a drummer. I sang him the chorus of Rock and Roll Army and he liked it. We had our first band practice along with the other guys, and Robert immediately took us up a few notches on our musical journey. Robert was as advertised. I'd never even been in a room with a live drummer playing, and he was really good. He could play along to Kiss, Motley Crue, and Metallica records, and everything sounded exactly like the original. He would pick up a guitar and play rhythm guitar to tons of songs, and he could sound just like most of the singers as well. He was maybe 15 years old, and he was already freakishly talented. When we started playing Rock and Roll Army, and for the first time I played along with a drummer, it was downright amazing. I just couldn't believe how much of a difference it made and how much better it was than just the three of us playing in our bedroom. It sort of sounded like an actual band, and I was absolutely stoked. I don't remember the actual situation or lineup, but out of that practice hatched a few different bands consisting of our little group of friends from Cameron Apartments and Robert. We had a few names early on. I know the first was from my neighbor Corey. He had drawn a really cool picture and the logo said Sinner's Faith. I know that I pitched that to the guys and they went along for a minute or two. Then it was changed to Rage and then Damage. During the months of this naming the band process, I was writing more songs. I remember there was one called The Right to Rule, which hurt my mom's feelings horribly when she read the lyrics that were lying on my bed one day while I was at school. I don't remember the song, but it was filled with teenage angst and rebellion against authority. I had probably just watched the movie Children of the Corn or something. It wasn't anything personal, but she surely took it that way. I think my parents may have started locking their doors at night during that time period. I couldn't blame them. I was a walking stereotype of a long-haired, heavy metal freak to begin with, and now I'm writing F my parents' lyrics. I'd lock the door too. Mom, if you can hear my thoughts, wherever you are, just know that I always loved you, and I'm forever grateful for how supportive you were to me throughout my whole life. Rest in peace. Another song I wrote during that time was called Fade Away. It was your typical rant about the possibility of World War III and fear of ultimately being radiated to the point of fading away. Fade away into nothing, fade away into dust, was the sing-along section of that song. Robert busted out his moneymaker with a very well-written sleazy rock song called Red Hot Love that took us into a different direction. We were having a good time just practicing, writing songs, and being stupid young teenage kids with a heavy metal dream. Things went that way for about a year. Sometimes one person would get kicked out or quit, but for the most part, 4 or 5 of us were always in whatever version of the band we had going on at the moment, and it was always about practicing for an eventual first gig. Without getting into anything specific, I'll just let you know that there was a lot of crazy shit that went on during that time between us and people around us. There was a ton of drama and some next-level sabotage at times from different friends and members, probably a bit more than typical 13 to 17-year-old kids in 1985. That was a trend which in most ways was unfortunate throughout our friendships and different bands, even years later. We did have a strong bond when someone needed help or if another group threatened one of us, but just like family, like the saying goes, we often hurt the ones we love. So even though I would often have dreams of our first gig together, write down our set list in health class, and visualize our entire first gig in my head, sadly, my first gig was not with my original band of brothers. That whole first year, people would bounce in and out of the band, but Robert and I were always a part of it. Somehow, at some point, I was out of it, and I don't remember why, but I was definitely bitter about it. I don't know if I was kicked out or quit, but I was approached by another band and went over to Spring Valley, a few miles west of my place, and practiced. The only thing I remember of my mindset is that I told them that I was in a band, and everyone was always being negative about everything, and I didn't want that type of shit. I remember feeling sort of weird because for the first time ever, I was playing with people I didn't know. They were told about me from someone at the music hut, and they called me up. They were all older than me, so that part was the same as before. I was sort of the novelty 14-year-old guitar player around the neighborhood. It was Sean on guitar and vocals, Todd on bass, and Jay on drums. We started playing a song I recently wrote. I never played it with the other band, and it sounded pretty good. It was my first time in a new situation in life, like when you start with a new girlfriend or job. You're not sure if it's good or bad, you just know it's different, and that you don't hate it yet. We started practicing and becoming friends. These guys, for the most part, were a step or two less Neanderthal than my usual pack of hyenas. I was the youngest and by far the worst behaved, and they loved me for it. They were at least 16 through 18, and at 14, I was definitely the bad influence on them. But we had fun, and we were making progress pretty fast. Sadly, it was apparent early on that Sean didn't have what it was going to take musically to move forward, and he started drinking. A lot. It sounds so crazy now that an 18-year-old had a drinking issue, but it actually really was. It was sad, because Sean really did look the part and had the pretty girlfriend. He was as nice a guy as you could hope to meet, with an excellent mom that would always open her home to all of us. But he just couldn't sing or play, not even at our mediocre level, so we had to get rid of him. Musically, we were doing pretty well. I was really starting to come up with some next-level songs and riffs. Jay and Todd were a good rhythm section, and we had a set list of songs. We just needed a singer. That was a common theme for long periods of my musical journey. In a stroke of luck, we found a guy named Bruce who was maybe better than we deserved. He was much older than us at the ripe old age of 24. He was tall, in decent shape, and had very long black hair. It's crazy to me as I type this and realize he was only 24 years old. I remember thinking at the time, I will never be as old as him. He wasn't earth-shatteringly good, but he was definitely decent. He could sing in key, he could hit some of those high-pitched screams that were so mandatory at that time, and he was a fun guy to be around. I never ever thought it was weird that he was older, but he was definitely aware of it, and it was surely an issue for him mentally. I think he joined because he just liked me personally and saw a lot of potential in my playing. We started practicing and pretty quickly had a set of songs together. Bruce was older and therefore had more life experience than me, and that made him a better lyric writer. So I started writing music and he was writing lyrics, and it was working out. I remember we had a set of songs, and some of them included titles like Don't Give Up, Give It To You, Gone Without a Trace, Bombs Away, and we did a cover of Black Sabbath's Paranoid. At this point, we were way next level from anything I did with my usual pack of friends, and I was really excited and dying to play a gig. A great thing about Bruce being older is that he was able to go to all the local bars that you have to be 21 to enter. He knew which one had what and who to talk to. These bars seemed completely out of the question to me in the past, but now it was definitely a possibility. One thing led to another, and we found ourselves as part of the weekly 3-band showcase at the Moby Grape on Tropicana and Maryland Parkway. We were so stoked and completely anxious to play, it seemed like it took forever for the day to come. We were trying to find cool clothes to wear and practicing our set exactly like we would play it that night. Bruce was the only one old enough to be in the bar. Everything in Las Vegas is 21 years old or over for the most part. They said we could walk in through the stage door, perform, and then immediately leave the same way we came in. We decided to name the band after a classic Van Halen song, Unchained. It seemed cool enough, and definitely fit in with the genre at that time. The day finally arrived, and we were the last band on a 3-band bill. That would normally be the headlining spot for a concert, but it was well known that the second band was considered the headliner and normally had the biggest following. The music would start at 10 p.m., so when the second band went on, the club would be at its maximum peak of attendance for the night, and the bar would try to make the most money during that time. The third band was there for the late-nighters to have something to stay entertained by for a while, and usually ended up playing to a near-empty bar by the end of their set. It was often 1 a.m. on a weekday night when the third band was done. We didn't care about any of that. If we were playing in front of just our moms and the bartender, it was still like a 20,000-seater to us. It was a rite of passage, a step into the real musician world, playing in one of the few places in Vegas that the best local bands played in. It was game time, and we were locked and loaded. The Moby Grape was located near the corner of a pretty big West Coast-style strip mall. It's just a block south of the UNLV campus, but it's also just north of a really bad area full of low-rent apartments. The stage door was behind the strip mall where all the businesses receive their delivery supplies and where all the large green dumpsters are. It was lit up pretty well, but when you're the next band up, you're sitting out there with potentially a few grand worth of equipment in an alley that is an 8-foot wall away from a pretty terrible neighborhood. We never cared or even pondered that for a moment. I'm just reflecting on it now, and I am grateful nothing bad ever happened. So now we can hear that the second band is almost done. None of our friends are old enough to get in to watch us play. 3 of us had never been inside the club or played any live show before, and our singer is about to perform with basically 3 little kids compared to himself. I know all of our parents were there, maybe a few siblings, but that's all I was sure of. My guitar teacher Kevin was there and came out the back door when the second band was done to help me load my stuff in. He told me, "There's a lot of people in there, and they want to see you play." He said, "Don't look nervous or they'll laugh at you. Just go up there and kick ass." I walked in the back door, and right away I had to turn to my left and walk up a few steps to the stage. I immediately noticed an entire open room of packed tables with old people that were smoking and drinking beer. When I say old, some of them must have been at least 35. I saw Jay setting up his drums on a riser. They were putting microphones on them, and I was thinking, oh shit. I could hear Todd already tuning his bass, and Kevin and some other guys were setting up my gear. I strapped my guitar on, plugged it in, and was thinking what little nasty riff can I play to let these fuckers in the crowd know right away that we're not here to play games. I put my guitar on, turned up the volume, and started playing some pentatonic scale as fast as I could. I then realized after a few seconds that nothing is working. No sound at all. Kevin is frantically messing with my guitar cable and checking the connections, turning the volume up and down on the amp, and just troubleshooting everything possible. I'm starting to get nervous, thinking, is this really not going to happen now? My gear always worked at band practice. What am I going to do? Then suddenly, some dude with long blonde hair comes through the back door with a Marshall half-stack and a white Charvel guitar. He puts it around my neck, plugs it in. I hit a chord, and it rings out like a heavy metal gift from the heavens. This night just got a lot better. Not only are we minutes away from playing a gig in a packed bar in front of drunk rock fans that actually want to like us, but I have a dream guitar setup that sounds far better than anything I ever played through before. Shortly after that, we all look at each other and confirm that we're ready to do this thing. I'm actually getting a little rush of adrenaline as I type this and reliving this moment from over 30 years ago. A tall guy with curly, moderately long hair comes up on stage, grabs the mic, and says that he's Mike Colada from 92.3 KOMP, which was our local hard rock station then, and still is to this day. That really sort of tripped me out. This was long before social media. Radio personalities were like phantom voices from the sky. You rarely saw the actual person talking through the airwaves, and I remember thinking how weird it was that this dude right next to me was Mike Colada. It was another notch of validation to myself that we were going up a notch on this Las Vegas hard rock scene. I forgot what he said exactly, but he gave us a very respectful introduction. Jay hit the hi-hat 4 times, and we launched into our first song. After about 10 seconds of playing, and when Bruce sang the first line, I felt a huge sigh of relief when I realized everything sounded good. Todd and I were in tune with each other, Jay could hear us through his monitor, and Bruce sounded fine. Most musicians will tell you that stage fright and anxiety often happen no matter how many people are in the crowd, but once you're a few seconds in and you know everything is at least decent, you can mentally come down and get into the moment. Well, now I was in that moment. I looked up into the crowd for the first time. It's like staring at a girl that you think is beautiful. You look in that general direction, but you don't want her to see you looking. But if she does look, then you want her to look back, and so on and so on. I remember taking a quick look around and could see that people were smiling, and it seemed they were enjoying it. I was getting looser and looser and really starting to enjoy it, up until I realized we were about 4 bars away from finishing the song, and then we would stop, and the crowd would react. I had dreams of this moment ever since I took my first lesson. Visualizing a roaring crowd after each song we played, I really did literally have dreams about it. I would even daydream about this moment. And here it was. In a few seconds, I would know the feeling of being either humiliated or accepted by my peers. This was it, a moment many people will never know. We hit our last note of the first song. I mentally flinched, and it was probably the equivalent of the type of physical flinch a Major League Baseball player would do when he realizes there's a 100-mile-per-hour fastball rising towards his face. This reaction meant a lot to me, probably more than just about anything that had ever happened to me in my very young and uneventful life. It would definitely set the tone for the rest of this gig and possibly the rest of my musical journey. And to my instant gratification, the place seemingly erupted in approval, yelling, clapping, and just completely cheering us on. It was such a great feeling. I was so insanely happy inside. It was maybe 100 people, tops, and it meant the world to me. We all felt a huge sense of pride in that moment, and it was a great payoff for almost 2 years of practice and starting from scratch. We went on to play another 8 songs or so. We played them all well, and the crowd kept cheering us on all the way to the end. I even had a loud applause after one of my guitar solos in a song, and that was a great feeling. In between one of the songs, some lady yelled out, "Is he a virgin?" to me. That was hilarious to everyone, except me, because little did they know I actually was. But that's another story for another day. When we finished, they actually kept cheering us on, and Mike Collada came back up and egged everyone on to give us an encore. That was really overwhelming, and we were stoked until we realized we were out of songs. So Bruce told them the truth, and we played our first song again. Hey, you must give the people what they want. After the show, everyone came up to us and gave us great words of encouragement. Our family and friends were proud and probably relieved that we didn't embarrass ourselves. All the local musicians gave us advice on all kinds of things, and we were completely stoked about the whole event and couldn't wait to do it again. Remembering back to this day really puts a smile on my face. It's been so long since I thought about any of this. I'm very grateful that the crowd made such an effort to cheer these kids on and let them feel what it's like to be in a real band. We didn't suck, but we definitely weren't doing anything mind-blowing. It was very cool of them to let us have that moment. That was my first taste of the magical energy exchange that happens when you're playing music to a crowd and they're feeling what you're playing. It's so rewarding to play an original song to strangers that have no reason to like you and have them react to something that was at one time just a little idea in your brain. It's so powerful to see that materialize full circle into something tangible that others can connect with. It was addicting to me. I imagine similar to a drug, but with a whole different set of side effects. I wish everyone could feel that phenomenon at least once in their life. It made me feel like I was definitely doing what I was meant to do, and it gave me confidence and purpose enough to mentally pull me through all the tough times that I was destined to endure in life. Once again, it was that power of music thing. Chapter 4. The Point of No Return. So with exactly one successful gig under our belts, you would think all that was left for Unchained was to decide on which major label we were going to sign with. Elektra was cool, and they had Motley Crue and Metallica, but Geffen was becoming a true player as well. Believe it or not, that wasn't the kind of choice that was offered to us. But I was walking around so proud, you'd have thought it was. I was happy to get that first gig over with, and was excited to get out there again. I thought about it all the time, and would watch the VHS tape that we had of it daily. I was watching it and trying to figure out how we could improve, and I also just enjoyed reliving the moment. I figured it was our first of many. I don't remember why, but somehow it wasn't to be. Unchained played one more show together in a small bar in Henderson, Nevada that was called What's Up, and we didn't have nearly the response of the first gig. It was a more realistic result for a typical bar gig in front of a small crowd consisting of the other bands on the bill and their friends. We didn't have the home field, as they say in sports. We did our best and didn't have any train wrecks, musician slang for major mistakes, but it definitely wasn't anywhere near as memorable as the Moby Grape. I guess you really do always remember your first time. One thing led to another, and Todd quit the band to pursue a more professional trade. I remember him saying something about spending too much time and money on this hobby and needing to get serious about life. He was probably 18 or 19, and definitely the least interested in becoming a rock star out of the four of us. I never spoke to him ever again. That's when things went wild for a few years. Robert ended up replacing Todd on bass, and we changed the name to Rag Doll, which was the name of a popular Aerosmith song at the time. Do you see the pattern? We went into a more glam rock direction look-wise, but the music was in the same genre. It was Robert, Jay, Bruce, and myself, and we played a few gigs with that lineup. Robert and I started high school and met a really wild kid named Joey who had bleached blonde hair, was tall, skinny, and wanted to be a singer. Bruce started getting really weird about our friendship and eventually quit the band over it. I remember Robert and I staring at each other in disbelief as Bruce stormed out of practice, which was in Robert's garage, after saying to us, "Go have fun with your young singer friend." I had never experienced that type of weird, insecure thing before from anyone. It wasn't our intention at all, but much like when a jealous husband or wife accuses someone of fidelity, it often leads them right into another person's arms. So now we're practicing with Joey in Rag Doll, and we're all underage now. Joey isn't nearly as good as Bruce vocally, but he more than makes up for it in personality. He was hilarious at times and had a ton of charisma. Like I mentioned earlier, looking the part was just as important as your talent level back then, even more so in a lot of ways. You could go somewhere if you looked the part, even if you were mediocre musically, but if you didn't look the part, you had no shot no matter how well you played. So, this started a very wild period of time in my life and my musical journey. We were playing underage house parties whenever we could, and that was a blast. My house is where we practiced. My parents worked a late swing shift, so quite a few times I'd throw a mini party with maybe 15 to 20 people in our little condo. We'd practice, drink shitty beer, and then clean up everything before my mom got home. I could go on and on, and on some more, about all the crazy times we had during that time. That's really not what this book is about, though. I'll just say that I don't regret that time at all. It was fun being young and trying to perfect our craft. We had a small army of friends that supported us with everything we did. We would have some good gigs and some bad ones. We were writing some pretty good songs for the most part. Robert was kicked out or quit, and Aaron took his place. Right about that time, my life became very real, as they say. Some time had passed, and I must have been right around 16 or so. I remember I was just about old enough to get an actual job. I had jobs before. I even worked a whole summer in a print shop so that I could buy a custom-built guitar, so I wasn't against working. But I hated school. After 6th grade, school had really become monotonousness to me. I was really decent at the things that mattered, like math, reading, and writing, and I felt that after 6th grade, I wasn't learning anything new, and certainly not anything useful to my career choice of professional rock star. All I really cared about was playing guitar and writing songs. This was even before I cared all that much about girls or owning my first car. I was just happiest when I was playing guitar or doing something that involved that. Lack of money to buy equipment was always an issue. I was becoming a terrible student at school because of how uninteresting it was to me, and of course my parents didn't like that. They quit supporting it, and for good reason. I wasn't balancing my life out, and they knew that was a mistake. But at the time, I was pissed when they wouldn't buy me equipment. I showed signs of having that all-or-nothing personality throughout my childhood. When I was into playing sports or collecting sports cards, that's all I did. When I was younger, I would get bored and move on to something else, but with music, I was going all in. I would read every article out there from musicians I looked up to. They all said that music is all in. You can't do it halfway and expect to get somewhere. You either believe in yourself or not. There's no safety net, all of that kind of thinking. Around this time, Ragdoll was doing pretty well. What I mean by that is, for a couple of high school kids, we were playing over 21 bars with the best local bands. We were writing respectable songs, we looked like an actual band, and now we had some interest from some guys that were actually in the business. Finding a place to practice was always a challenge. By now, I'm 3 years into this thing, and everyone involved, including friends, had their turn of having us practicing at their house, in their garage, or even at their place of business after hours. It was time to find a place for us to call home, a band studio of some type. There happened to be a brand new building just north of Tropicana Boulevard and Valley View called NRS, which stood for Nevada Rehearsal Studios. It was owned by 2 middle-aged black guys that were really nice and professional. It was in a big industrial complex, and it was very nicely done. If I remember correctly, there were 4 decent-sized rooms in a long hallway. Each room had carpeted floors, soundproofed walls, and the best part, its own PA system for the renters' use. They rented it by the hour, day, week, or month, whatever you needed. It was a huge step up from playing in my bedroom or Todd's uncle's friend's print shop. I don't know how we were able to afford being there, but somehow we did, and almost immediately the guys that owned us took a liking to us. They explained how they were looking for artists to start a label or talent company of some sort with, and they wanted us to be the rock band part of it. They said we could practice for free. They'd record us for free in the large recording studio that was at the end of the hallway. They would pay for professional photos and put together a promotional package for us. We thought that sounded great. I was very excited, partly because someone was interested in doing something with us, and partly because my going all in on music thing might take off even sooner than I thought. Now, keep in mind, we know that we're not that good yet. We knew this sounded too good to be true, but we were going to ride it out and see what happened. It was a great feeling to at least have a possibility of something big happening. They loved our look, and loved that I was so young and played like I could play. Even at 15 or 16, I was still the youngest kid around playing in those bars. Today you can find a dozen 10-year-old kids on YouTube that can play better than I ever did in my life, but it was a different world then, as I keep referring to. A few months went by, and we practiced for free. We did at least 2 major photo shoots, and we recorded a demo of at least 5 songs, and it was all free of charge. I even recorded some tracks for a solo artist female singer that they had on the same type of deal. It was a legit startup label trying to find its way, and they did everything they offered, and never asked us for a dime. They even let us take their PA system out of the building to play an occasional house party now and then. Our parents were skeptical, of course. They wanted to know what the deal really was. They didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility that it was all legit, but it did have all the makings of bullshit. My once great relationship with my dad was becoming very strained. In his eyes, his sports-playing kid that he loved was now a weird-looking, unrealistic dreamer. He didn't understand my music or what it meant. He knew it meant a lot to me, but I think if he had it his way, I would have moved on by that point. The year of 9th grade was just brutal for me as far as school went. We had just moved out of Cameron Apartments where we had lived since I moved to Vegas, and moved way up to the northwest part of Las Vegas off of Washington Avenue. That put me in a different zone for high school, and I ended up going to Bonanza High instead of Clark High, where all the kids I went to 7th and 8th grade ended up going. On top of that, the Las Vegas schools were doing an asbestos removal project, and that meant that certain schools were doing double shifts. While they were doing construction on one school, the nearest school would take all the students, and then once one school was completed, it would switch to the other school. That all translated into me having to be in my class for first period at 6 a.m. That meant I was waking up at 4:30 a.m. to make it to school, a new school, with new people. And I hated school in general. This wasn't acceptable to my teenage mind. I was about to sign what I thought was a multi-year record contract. I was already playing bars, I had photo shoots, and I had already realized there was no chance I was going to make it through 4 years of high school. I decided to explain all of this to my parents, and I asked them to pull me out of school permanently. I was 14, 15 years old, and more than halfway through 9th grade. That conversation didn't go well for me. I was pleading my case and telling them that I'd rather start working so I can get some real equipment. I wanted to start earning money when I wasn't playing music rather than wasting time in school when I knew I wasn't going to stay until graduation. As expected, they weren't happy with this. My dad started asking me questions like, where do I see myself at 25? What if music doesn't work out? What are you going to do then? He was asking all of the questions any concerned parent would ask a kid who was talking like I was. I explained to him, I see myself being very successful in music by the time I'm 25. I plan on being signed to a major label, touring, and putting out albums by the time I'm 25 years old. He said, what if you don't? What if music doesn't pay the bills? What if it's not meant to be? I explained all of the things I had been reading, and I told him I couldn't think that way. I had to make it, and I would, but if for some inconceivable reason I didn't make it in music, quitting school would never be a regret. Even at that young age, I was absolutely positive that my path was not going to require an academic scholarship. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. Both of my parents didn't go to college, and they were fine. My dad sold real estate and drove a cab most of his life, and my mom was a waitress at a high-end steakhouse for many years. I know those don't sound like dream jobs, but I'll tell you what, I never went without things I needed, or most things I wanted. With the exception of when my parents split up, money never seemed like much of an issue, at least on a reasonable level. I always had a decent roof over my head, utilities, food. We went out to eat often and took occasional mini vacations. I figured I'd always work things out one way or another, but I wasn't going to take a path in life that would leave me with regrets and asking myself, what if? My parents begrudgingly agreed to take me out of school. It was a very awkward conversation between my mom, dad, and the dean of Bonanza High School. I'm pretty sure that they must have had a conversation beforehand about making me see the light. There was definitely a bit of a come-to-Jesus speech being preached to me. They put on the full-court press and started drilling me about all of the things that responsible adults should drill a young teenager about when they're asking to be pulled out of school to pursue a career as a rock star. I listened without saying a word. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there quietly and shook my head at what they were saying. The whole time I was just thinking to myself how I'm going to show them when I sign that big contract. I was thinking of how good our new songs were getting, how the crowd reacted at the Moby Grape, and how great it was going to be to invite these same 3 people to watch us headline the Thomas and Mack Center one day. When they were done, and probably feeling like they somehow broke through my stubborn teenage mental wall of unrealistic ignorance, I said in a slightly arrogant tone, I appreciate all of your concern, but I no longer feel that this institution has anything to offer me. This comment really pissed my dad off. He knew I was being an arrogant little smartass by it, and when we walked out of the school, he immediately said to me, You will have a job every day you live under my roof from here on out. That was fine with me. That was my plan all along, but I knew what he meant by it. It was a big moment in my life. I didn't really realize it at the time, but looking back at it, that decision was pretty much turning my hobby into a lifelong quest at trying to be successful in music. Although I was still somewhat realistic that making it to stardom would be hard, I really felt in my heart that I would. I felt I had a good start, and at 14, 15 years old, I had some bar gigs under my belt, some demo recordings, and a new label about to give us a contract any day. I felt like we just might be that lucky one that actually does something. I agreed that my dad was correct 99.9% of the time in the 1980s when he said that music won't pay the bills, usually. Chapter 5. Mass Hysteria. Fresh out of school, and I couldn't be happier. Such a weight had been lifted to not have to wake up, get ready, and drag myself to that mundane building of nonsense. I never regretted leaving school then, and even now at 45 years old, I still have never regretted it. I was excited to start making some money, to start getting reimbursed for being somewhere I didn't want to be, and to start being able to buy new gear and not have to ask anyone. When I worked in the print shop a few summers before, it was a tedious job, but it was way better than school, and I would get a paycheck at the end of each week. I loved the concept of it. So I jumped on my bike and started looking for a job. Keep in mind, I'm still 15, and I have really long hair. I'm wearing about 50 bracelets on my arm, and most days wearing some sort of shirt that a huge chunk of society would find offensive. I don't remember, but I'd like to think I at least had enough sense to put on a decent shirt when I went job hunting. I can't say for sure that I did, though. For whatever number of reasons, my initial search to join the working force wasn't going well. I was getting a lot of, "You have to be at least 16 or 18 here," "Your hair is too long to work around food," and "We're not hiring at this time." This was starting to become an issue with my dad. He was on me and turning up the pressure. Our relationship was getting more tense with each day that I wasn't employed. He was keeping his promise to me that I wouldn't be laying around under his roof, not going to school and not working. This whole time I would look for a job in the day and play guitar most of the time when I was home. Band practices were going great, and the NRS guys were pumping us up about the contract being ready at any time. So any negative energy I was feeling from the reality of my job hunt was being replaced by the first big step to my dream life being right there. At least that's what I thought. I eventually get a call from a new fast food chain called Del Taco. Joey worked there for a while, and I think he might have helped me get an interview. I clearly remember sitting in one of those hard plastic booths with the 30-something-year-old manager and telling him that I was grateful for the opportunity and that I would do a great job, but not to make my schedule too far in advance because I could literally be going on tour at any time. He looked at me with a pretty big smile and said with a bit of a chuckle, "Thanks for letting me know, and I'll keep that in mind." He was just added to my mental guest list of people I would invite to watch us headline the Thomas and Mack Arena one day. My first day starts at Del Taco on Rainbow Boulevard and Oakley Boulevard, and I'm oddly excited about it. Looking forward to getting Dad off my ass and making some money. I never gave much thought to the actual working part of it, and I found out really quickly that I was way better at playing guitar than slow cooking the beans. I really sucked at the job, and I almost gave that manager guy that hired me a heart attack when I was using the deep fryer with all those bracelets on my wrist. One of them could have easily been caught on the fryer basket, and my arm would have been like a giant fried taquito. I have to give him credit. He tried to find a job for me to do there that I didn't suck at, but I simply wasn't up to the task, and I was handed my Del Taco walking papers. So once again, my days the next few weeks consisted of hitting the pavement on the job hunt again by day, guitar whenever possible, and band practice at night. I was just trying to find any job that I could do that would accept me at my age and with long hair. I was really banking on getting a good contract from the NRS guys and being able to get my music career going. But for now, I needed to be employed. Shortly after Del Taco, I found the perfect type of job for my situation in a telemarketing sales office, commonly known as a boiler room. It was the perfect job for musicians like myself and just about any other type of creature that just didn't fit into the more traditional workforce. You could have long hair, and hours were typically between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. That was perfect because you could pick up a shift in between and not have to wake up too early, and it would never interfere with playing gigs. They also paid better than most of the minimum wage type jobs and paid weekly. So, for the time being, my employment situation was taken care of. It was a good time for me. I was a young man finding my way in the world. I was employed, I was in a band that had some interest, and I even had a little Honda Spree moped to drive around that cost me next to nothing to run. Things were still getting progressively worse between my dad and I, though. He was happy I was working. Then he started bringing up that maybe I should start paying some of the bills. A very reasonable request looking back, but they say teenagers are a nightmare for a reason. Aaron was now 19 and just moved into his first apartment on his own. He was living with our good friend Doug and his roommate, and I would stop by and hang out there often. It was close to NRS, so we would often get together before and or after practice, and then I would drive my moped home, about 10 miles away. After my dad brought up the idea of me paying some bills, I started thinking, why should I pay you money and live under your roof by your rules when I can pay the same money and have a blast living with my friends? It's embarrassing for me to even admit this now, but I'm assuming most of us were 16 before and had similar opinions on a situation like this. After a few more heated arguments, and much to my mother's chagrin, I loaded up my stuff in Aaron's truck and moved over to Wynn Road and Twain Avenue to get a taste of living life like a real man. So now I'm employed, have my own place, sort of, a moped, and still have a pending contract from NRS. What could go wrong? I started getting some heavy doses of reality real fast. The first was that the NRS contract finally arrived. I handed it to one of my friends who was a manager for Crash Co., one of the bigger local bands at the time. He told me immediately that it was a horrible contract and that he would highly advise me to not sign it. I was really bummed out. This was the card we had to play, the thing other bands didn't have, the one really great light at the end of the tunnel, and just like that, it was gone. We acquired a few more opinions on it, and everyone said the same thing, that it was a terrible contract. It was a horrible feeling, and I almost wanted to sign it anyway just so all the talking I did about it would be true somehow. It was so humiliating to me to have to admit that it wasn't true, that all the squares around me were right, that it all sounded too good to be true. I have no recollection of how it went down when we confronted the NRS guys about the contract, but I do remember the bottom line was we were out of the studio, without a place to practice, studio to record in, and most importantly, without a contract. Back to ground zero. It made going to work harder for me, not having that light at the end of the tunnel. It magnified the tension between my dad and I, who I hadn't even spoken to since I moved out. My wonderful mother would meet me often after she was done working and take me out to eat and give me extra money. She was doing her best to satisfy my dad with his tough love towards me, while still staying supportive of me and my dream. What a fantastic mom I was blessed to have. There was nothing left to do for Ragdoll other than dust ourselves off and start trying to move on. That just wasn't going to be easy, though. We parted ways with Joey and found ourselves without a singer. When Joey was in the band, I was writing a lot of the lyrics and often working with Joey on how the melodies and vocals would fit over the riffs. I guess this somehow led me to believe that I could take over the vocals, and I gave it a shot. I was playing lead guitar and singing lead vocals at around 16, and it was a very weird feeling. From the moment I started playing guitar, it was always a positive thing for me mentally. I usually would be praised and encouraged by others for my playing. For the most part, our gigs were usually fun and full of praise from my peers. I didn't realize it at the time, but I liked that attention of it. It fueled my fire and made me want to get better and better. It's what made me want to be a rock star. Once I started singing, it wasn't like that. It was much harder than playing guitar, and although I really tried, I sucked pretty badly. I didn't think I did, but I definitely did. Even though Joey wasn't the best vocalist, he was still entertaining. He looked the part, and we looked like a band. One of our friends tried to cut my hair and fucked it up bad. It was way shorter than it was, which I know sounds like a non-issue now, but to me at the time, it was a huge deal. I thought I was this edgy-looking young guitar player, and now I felt like this dorky older guitar player who was trying to sing too. I remember playing a house party where we used to always go over well, and everyone would party and have a good time cheering us on. When I was singing, it wasn't fun. People barely paid attention, and it was killing our whole vibe. We had a gig at the main gate, which was basically like the Moby Grape North, the other bar in town where all the best bands in town played. It was near Nellis Air Force Base, and usually full of military people letting loose and having a good time. We were playing third, the same slot that Unchained played that great gig 2 years before at the Moby Grape. Unfortunately, it was a much different result. I remember playing our first song, Ripping at the Seams, and there was only about 20 people in the bar. 2 girls in their early 20s were sitting right in front of the stage. They were looking right at me, like anyone would watch the singer, and I saw one girl ask the other if she liked us. I could clearly see her shrug her shoulders with a gesture that suggested, they're okay. It really bothered me for some reason. It wasn't even like she said we sucked or something. It was just that she thought we were okay, like she could take it or leave it. And I thought how her opinion of us would have probably been different if Joey was the singer. And for the first time in my young music career, as I was playing at a bar I always wanted to play at, I just wanted the gig to end. Shortly after, I broke a guitar string and my backup guitar was badly out of tune. None of our small army of friends were around to help this time, and I had to take a few minutes to tune the guitar up in front of the crowd of maybe 10 people by this time. We struggled through a few more songs, and it mercifully came to an end to a splatter of claps. We had a few more gigs booked when Jay announced he was quitting the band. I remember pleading with him not to. We had played together for about 3 years now, and hung out a lot together before I moved out. When I knew he wasn't going to change his mind, I asked him to at least play the gigs that had booked, and he declined. Then I was really pissed off. Those gigs were hard to get, and I knew it was all about my vocals, but I wasn't a quitter, and I was really hurt that he took that route about the situation. It was like my first real breakup in life, kind of. I was thinking how my guitar playing is what catapulted our great songs, and thought he was really fucked up to bail on me now, while I was literally trying to find my voice. I knew the last gig was bad, but there wasn't anyone there anyway. It wouldn't have mattered if we were great either. The bar was just dead that night. I was in a bad place, but knew I could get better, and I remember feeling driven to get better at both guitar and vocals. Almost immediately after that, Robert jumped back in my life with an offer to merge our band that now consisted of Aaron and myself with his band that was called Shotgun Wedding. Always loved that. They consisted of Chris from the Damage days playing guitar, Dan, a friend from Cameron Apartments on vocals, and Robert on drums. Our great friend John, who was the nicest guy in the world, was the collateral damage in that deal. He had just bought a bass to have some fun and was playing with them when the big merger happened. I felt badly about that. But he went on to become a fire department captain with wonderful kids and a loving wife. He'll probably read this, so you're welcome, John. That merger might have saved you from a musician's life of pain and anguish. It was just what the doctor ordered. I was a bit bummed about not doing vocals any longer, but more relieved to go back to just playing guitar and writing songs. That's what I was meant to do. None of the other guys had played in the clubs yet. This was going to be a whole different animal of a band. We were around 16 to 21 years old now and really starting to learn how to party and raise hell like the big boys. Everyone was bouncing around through jobs, hustling money, chasing girls, drinking, smoking weed, and trying to become a real hard rock band. The apartment that Doug, Aaron, and I lived in was party headquarters. Every day before and after whatever work we were doing would usually end up in drinking and playing cards. We decided to go with our usual formula of naming the band after a song that we liked. So we decided on Sex Action, which was a popular LA Guns song at the time. We played at the usual house parties and sometimes Moby Grape and Main Gate. We were way different than Ragdoll. Music and style had changed, and we were much more like a Guns N' Roses attitude type of band. We didn't give a shit what we looked like as long as it was rock, and that usually meant a bit offensive to most people. We had all kinds of different songs. They would pretty much go with whatever I wrote, and that made for some crazy shit. We had ballads, metal songs, rock songs, and even did a cover of Hound Dog by Elvis, but changed it to Dead Fuck. It went like this. You ain't nothing but a dead fuck, lying there all the time. You never moved a muscle and you ain't no friend of mine. Wonder why that one never took off. One of the best nights of that time period was definitely one of those power of music moments. Aaron somehow booked us a Halloween gig at a little neighborhood bar on Decatur Boulevard and Twain Avenue called Joshua's Pub. I have no idea why they hired an original metal band of teenagers to play on Halloween at a bar where the average patron was easily 40 years old plus, but they did, and they paid well, too. The only condition was we had to play a song called Shaking by Eddie Money. We were thinking, what the fuck is that and why? I said, okay, let me figure this thing out. It was easy enough, and we learned it and played it. They loved it. The bar was packed, and the people were as cool as could be. They listened to our original songs, and even liked Dead Fuck. It was an absolute blast, and the whole night went on without a single issue. It was a great night where our music brought everyone together. It's fun to think back on it now. That was 1989. I was still practicing whenever I could, but my life was leaning more towards survival and less towards a focused musical goal. I was working in the telemarketing place at least 30 hours a week. We would practice 4 or 5 nights a week, and then we'd hang out the rest of the time. It was fun for a while, but things were changing quickly. Aaron was 4 years older and had a lot on his plate. He was responsible for rent and most of the bills, not just for himself, but for other people in his family at other addresses as well. Doug and I paid for some things at our place, but nothing near what Aaron was having to come up with, and he did whatever he had to do to get it done. So music was not his first priority all the time. I was starting to feel homesick, and I could see the dynamics around our apartment were changing. It had been about a year since I moved out, and I decided it was a good time to talk to my mom about coming back home. I think she was happy, but she knew it was going to be a challenge with my dad, as did I. We decided it's best that I just go home with her right then and talk it out with my dad when he comes home from work. That meant talking to him after he drove a cab around Las Vegas for 10 straight hours. We probably should have thought that through a little better. When he came home, I was sleeping on the couch. I greeted him when he came through the door and explained what was going on. I always knew my dad loved me throughout the whole ordeal. I even knew what he was trying to get through to me. But my hunger to pursue music trumped his intentions for me. That's all it ever was. He told me that he loved me, but he just didn't like me very much at this moment. I guess I felt the same way. He was happy to know I was employed, and we agreed to work on our relationship and to become friends again. I'm happy to say, over the next 20 years or so, until the day he passed in 2001, we did exactly that. He never understood my music. It just wasn't his cup of tea, but we bonded through sports, shows, movies, and many other things. When it was all said and done, my dad was great to me, and I always knew he cared. He was my voice of reason, and I was blessed to have had him in my life. Chapter 6. Serious but Stable Condition. Now I'm 16 and back at home after a year on my own. I learned a lot about life in that year. I learned very valuable life lessons like the importance of having income, paying bills, being dependable, and how to balance the things you have to do with the things you want to do. Most importantly, I learned that things are definitely easier at home, and putting up with a few rules here and there was a small price to pay for not having to completely fend for yourself. Things with my parents were pretty much fine from that point on. They were over the fact that I wasn't going to school, and they saw that I had a good work ethic. I was never unemployed for very long and would go long stints at the same job. I paid utility bills here and there, but they didn't even care about most of it. I was self-sufficient with most things and rarely had to ask for help with anything. Sex Action was still together, but somewhere along the way we lost Robert on drums, and somehow Jay ended up back in the band. This was an ongoing theme, as I explained earlier. We had a small army of friends and bandmates, but like most groups of people, there was often some sort of drama. Someone didn't like something someone else said, someone got together with somebody's girlfriend, or somebody just was a little too drunk one night. That usually would cause turmoil every few months. For a while, that version of Sex Action was having fun. Lots of partying at practice, playing house party type gigs, and writing songs. It went on that way for at least a year or so. Sometime around the time I was 17 or 18, Robert popped back into my musical journey with an offer I couldn't refuse. He was playing in a band called Crocodile Smile, who I named, thank you very much, and I really liked them. They were much different than Sex Action, much more melodic and way more talented from a musical standpoint. I always enjoyed listening to them play and would often go watch them practice. We played at least a few gigs together, and our two bands got along for the most part. They had a Japanese guitarist named Dave that was absolutely amazing. He was completely self-taught and just made everything seem so effortless. There were plenty of guys that could play fast or figure out hard things to play, but Dave could hear something that was incredibly hard to play one time and play it right back perfectly. He didn't even know the notes or chords he was playing. It was like that Matt Damon character in Good Will Hunting with math, when Dave picked up a guitar, drums, or even a video game. He definitely just understood it. It was like breathing to him. It kind of made me sick in a way. I was putting less effort into concentrating solely on guitar at that point. I was getting more into writing and just trying to make the band as good as possible. But I was still kind of the man amongst my crowd of friends when it came to guitar playing. Now with Dave around, I was definitely a way distant second when it came to actual guitar talent. Luckily for me, I was able to get over it quickly and just tried to pick up tips from him whenever I could. It pushed me to be my best, even if I knew I would never be that good. It made me want to be a better songwriter and to really be valuable in that regard. On top of Dave being very talented, he was also the nicest guy you could ever hope to meet. He was very positive and was always giving me praise. He would often support our band even when he wasn't playing the gig with us, and mentioned to me a few times that he liked heavier music than he was playing with Crocodile Smile. One thing led to another. Sex Action seemed to be kind of stagnant. We never recorded a demo, and I don't remember what plan we had, or if we even had a plan. I know the band meant a lot to all of us, but time was going by, and nothing was happening. Robert asked me once again about a merger. He said that he and Dave would be interested in starting a band with Aaron and me. That was pretty interesting. I had just written a few songs that really weren't going to be good in Sex Action. I thought it would be so much fun to play with Dave, and it would make me better. I figured we could write some great riffs together with his talent and my creativity. Robert was a great drummer and an excellent singer as well. If we could find a good singer, we'd have something with a ton of potential to do something big. I had to tell the guys that Aaron and I were quitting Sex Action, and this time Jay was the one pissed off at me. I remember him calling me and asking if it was true. I said yes, and he hung up. We didn't talk for quite some time after that. I didn't like doing it, but I knew this was the best move for me, and I had to do what I thought was best for my musical future. We started putting the band together, which eventually would be called Dirty McNasty. That wasn't the name of a song that we liked. I'm not sure where it came from, but I liked it. We started playing some of the new songs I was working on, and I was really digging it. Some of the early ones were Cry, Bitch and Moan, Never Be the Same, The Drunk Song, and music to what was eventually Thing for You. It was such a different dynamic having Dave playing guitar on the other side. Every practice was inspiring to me. He liked the songs the way they were and would just play incredible guitar over it. Aaron and Robert played great together, and everything was turning out just the way we thought it would when the idea was first presented. Once we had a few songs together, it was time to look for a singer. I don't think we had any prospects at all in mind. We put out some ads and found a guy named Rick that turned out to be pretty much incredible. He was by far the best singer we played with. He was a few years older and had been playing in different Vegas bands for many years. He looked the part, had some great melody ideas, and could really sing his ass off. He and Robert would do some amazing harmonies when the song called for it, and for the first time I really felt like I was in a band that was truly good enough to do something big. We had a great place to practice. It was in a horrible part of town off of Cheyenne Avenue and Civic Center Drive in North Las Vegas. None of us lived anywhere near it, but it was such a great place it was worth the commute. We had 24-hour access, and it had a steel door that made it hard to break into. It had high ceilings, and it was a big space, big enough to easily fit a drum riser and tons of equipment in. We were able to practice like we were on a big stage, and there were mirrors in front of us as well. It was just a perfect place. It even had a convenience store in front of it with anything you would need. We threw some great parties there. We wrote a set of quality songs pretty fast and started playing the clubs. At the time, the main gate was still around, and a place called Club Rock became the latest Moby Grape-type place. We quickly earned the prime spot, and even if we did get stuck playing third, we would still have a good crowd. I don't remember us having any bad gigs in that band. We were definitely good at what we were doing, and I think at that time we could have opened for any band in that genre and not have ever been blown off the stage. To quote the 80s Arizona hard rock band Icon, we looked good, we played good, and we wrote good songs. We didn't have any type of interest from anyone in the business, but we didn't solicit it either. We were just getting started, and I felt like I had a winning lottery ticket in my pocket. I was still working at telemarketing offices, but I picked up a part-time job that I was very proud of. At 18 years old, J.B. Wilson, owner of the Music Hut, asked me if I was interested in being the guitar teacher there. I was truly honored. Just 5 years prior, I took my first guitar lesson there and knew absolutely nothing about playing. And now I was being asked to do what Kevin did for me and teach others how to play guitar. I really felt validated by this offer, and of course I agreed to it and started taking students right away. I had a small batch of students that I would meet at the store individually twice a week. Some were younger, like my age when I started. Some were older, like in their 30s, some male and some female. I think I did a decent job with most. They usually showed up each week without a complaint. There was one kid that reminded me of myself. I'll never forget, he said he wanted to learn how to play the song Mother by Danzig. I did my best Kevin impersonation and said, "I can teach you this song, but what do you really want to do with guitar playing? Do you just want to learn songs like this? Or do you want to shred like this?" And I played my little version of the insane guitar solo like Kevin did to me. Kevin's solo was much better, though, and it was much more effective with me than mine was to this student. He replied, "I think I'd just like to learn the Danzig song for now." This incident, and an extreme dislike for teaching, made me decide to stick to playing and leave the teaching to someone else. It was actually making me not want to play guitar. I would be there for 4 or 5 hours a day teaching, and when the day was done, I was done playing guitar. Music was always an escape for me, and something I desperately looked forward to since the day I started it. I didn't like the feeling that teaching was giving me, so I knew it was time to give up teaching. I loved the opportunity, though, and I'm very happy I had the chance to try it. Some people are good teachers. At that time, I was not one of them. One night around this time period, Dirty McNasty was playing at the main gate. It was a good-sized crowd, and we were kicking ass. Everything was going great, and we were about halfway through our set and started playing Never Be the Same. It was a pretty hard song to play on guitar. It had a few more chords than a lot of our other songs, and it was pretty busy on guitar. In the middle of the song, my hand started cramping up real badly, and I couldn't play for a few seconds. I was just trying to cheat my way through it the best I could, and with Dave playing, nobody seemed to notice. It was really freaking me out. I never experienced this before, and just when I was going to have no other choice but to stop playing and try to get my shit together, everything went back to normal just as quickly as it started, and I was fine for the rest of the gig. It was a scary feeling, though, and stuck in the back of my mind the rest of the show, and even later that night. I figured it was just a weird hand cramp and forgot about it after a few days. Things seemed to be right on pace for Dirty McNasty, and then I noticed Dave not being as excited as he was at the beginning. After a few weird practices and standoffish behavior, we asked him about it. He said he just wasn't feeling it any longer. He said that he liked the band, but he just wanted to do something heavier, like real heavy, death metal heavy. We tried to figure it out, but it was obvious his heart wasn't in it. We agreed he'd play one last show that we had booked at Calamity Jane's together, and then he'd be done. Calamity Jane's was a really cool music venue on Boulder Highway on the east side of Vegas. All the smaller national acts played there, and I saw some great acts there over the years. I was excited to play there and bummed it was our last gig with Dave. We absolutely killed that place. I think Dave leaving motivated us all more, and there was a big crowd that was definitely digging what we were doing. After the gig, it seemed like everyone in that place was telling me how great we were, and it really felt like something special was going on. We went somewhere after the gig to party, and Dave joined us. Someone taped the show, and it was even better than I thought. I remember Rick looking at Dave and asking him if he was really still going to quit after that, and Dave said he was. I felt a ton of pressure by that. I really didn't want to go through a long audition process for guitarists and have our material get stale while rehearsing all these songs a million times until we found the right person. We had no prospects, and finding someone as good as Dave wasn't an option. I was always a fan of two guitarists bands. I liked that sound much better, but we decided to move forward as a four-piece band and just keep on trying to write the best songs we could. I would just do my best on guitar like always, and if the right person happened to come along, we'd add a guitarist then. Some of our friends were renting space in our rehearsal place. Like I said earlier, this place was big, and our buddies were starting a band, so it worked out well for all of us. They would have a place to practice, and we would save money on rent. It was Dan and Chris from the Sex Action days and a few other friends. They were pretty much starting a band from scratch for fun, and for a while, they didn't have a lead guitarist. I loved the guys in the band like brothers, and they were playing heavier stuff. Pretty much thrash metal, but not the doom and gloom type stuff. It was usually with funny lyrics, and it was just fun. I would often practice with Dirty McNasty, and then stay and practice with them afterwards. I was probably playing the best guitar of my life at this time, and I was really creative as well. It seemed like I was coming up with cool new riffs often, and even helping with some songwriting ideas with the other band that was called Detox. It was a fun time on the local Vegas music scene for me. I had Dirty McNasty, which had a decent amount of respect, and I was eventually a member of Detox too. Detox was starting from square one and was heavy and hungry. Between the two bands, it seemed I almost always had a few gigs lined up, and Dirty McNasty cut a 3-song demo that came out really good. I finally had something recorded that I could play with pride. We were having good gigs as a 4-piece, though we weren't as good as when we had Dave, but we were still really solid. Our demo was way above average of anything I was hearing around Vegas at the time. We took a drive out to L.A. and went to Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip, which was Mecca for hard rock bands in the hard rock glory days. There were hundreds of bands and musicians handing out flyers in maybe a 3-block stretch, with some of the most famous clubs in the world at the time, like the Whiskey, the Troubadour, the Rainbow, etc. It was absolutely insane to see so many people that looked like rock stars in one place. I was a bit intimidated, and then I went to a 4-band showcase and I realized we could definitely hang with these guys. Most bands had a great musician here or there, but I didn't hear great songs or anything original. I was surprised. I expected to feel like we'd be blown off the stage, but that wasn't the case at all. Aaron and I started inquiring about gigs, and for some reason thought the fact that we were from Vegas would hold value with these clubs. We quickly were taught a lesson in supply and demand. The big clubs wouldn't even talk to us at all, so we drove to some place called Jezebel's in Anaheim. A huge guy named Tiny, true story, explained to us that they would charge us $1,500 to play at their club, because nobody would know who we are, and it would probably be a dead night. He went on to explain that record label A&R guys sometimes come in there, and if they like us, they had the power to get us signed to a record contract. That was the way it was out there at that time. So many bands fighting for that same spot that it turned everything upside down. They gave you tickets to sell, and if you could sell them to your friends, family, and fans, if you had any, you could break even, or maybe make a profit that way. It was a different world, and it opened my eyes to the reality of playing this music game on the highest level. I remember driving home to Vegas and just feeling happy inside knowing that we could play out there and definitely hang with those bands. Chapter 7. Condition Critical. Just as Dirty McNasty finished our demo and were looking to take the next step forward, some things that were going on in the dark came into the light, and it was way too much for us to deal with at the time. I'm not going to get into the details, but to say we handled a very delicate situation carelessly would be a big understatement. When the dust settled, we had lost a great singer, and after about a year of auditions, it was pretty obvious that Rick wasn't replaceable. We tried to get back together for a stint, but it wasn't meant to be. We never played another gig again. At least 2 years of my time, and my best shot at doing something was gone, just like that. Luckily for me, as this Dirty McNasty drama was coming to an end, Detox was improving at a fast pace. Our songs were getting better and better, the band was getting tighter, and most importantly, most of the time, we had a great time. I was around 19 or so by this time. Chris, his older brother Ricky, and Doug, who was my old friend and roommate when I moved out with Aaron, were renting a good-sized 2-story house off of Torrey Pines in Flamingo. They were all in their early 20s, employed, and we were all constantly partying there. Sometimes I wouldn't go home for a few days at a time. It seemed that every single night we would go to band practice, go back to the house, play pool and Nintendo for money against each other, drink, smoke weed, and bet on football games. We were in Las Vegas, and betting on sports was always legal. At the time, you'd make a bet and they would hand you a computer paper receipt with what you bet on it. On an NFL Sunday, sometimes we would have 10 to 20 tickets each on these games, and we would throw all the losing tickets behind the entertainment center. By the end of the year, there would be a pile of losing tickets about 5 feet long and 3 feet high. We probably could have recorded a full-length album, which wasn't cheap at the time, and distributed it ourselves if we added up the amount of all those tickets. But we didn't think like that at the time. We were serious about the band, constantly trying to get better, but never really focused on a specific goal with a timeline and plan in mind. It was always like, let's make a demo, get signed, and go on tour all over the country. We played gigs often. We had a lineup of Dan, Chris, Aaron A., not my original best friend Aaron, and Sandro on drums. We played like that for quite some time. Then, once again, Robert was back into my musical journey and replaced Sandro for some reason. I don't remember why. That lineup went on to play many shows, mostly good, sometimes great, and occasionally bad. We practiced 4 or 5 days a week religiously and always played 1 or 2 gigs a month. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot of shows, but when you're an original band in a small area, there's really not a lot of opportunities to play. Back then, there weren't many paths to even moderate success for an original band. Ultimately, you had to get some sort of record deal to be able to get the nationwide and/or global distribution and marketing needed to get out of your hometown. You couldn't go buy top-notch video recording equipment, produce your own video, and teach yourself how to be a digital marketer and blast your own stuff worldwide. The do-it-yourself, or DIY as they call it, path was much more limited back in the late 80s and early 90s, and trying to make even a modest living as an original artist without a proper label behind you was nearly impossible. I can't even think of one example off the top of my head that accomplished it. Many great original bands would find that after building a loyal local following, they would often be stuck in a local hero hold pattern. You can't play very often because your following will start splitting up. They're not going to all go to each event when they know that you'll be playing another next week. Then your crowd starts thinning out and local promoters and venue owners will put less value on your band. You're better off playing 1 gig a month with 200 people there than 3 gigs a month with 70 people at each. You have to create a demand for your gigs, make an event out of each one. That's easier said than done. Successful touring bands put out an album and then go on tour through a bunch of cities and sometimes countries. They rarely go to the same place more than once a year, and when they go back, they're most likely touring a new album with a fresh look, and it keeps their fans hungry for more. When you're a local hero band, you have some die-hard friends and fans that will follow you to the end of the earth, but most people aren't going to go to your show more than every now and then, and when you're probably playing the same set or close to it every time they see you, that causes you to lose momentum. This has happened to many great bands. They start up, they're the new thing in town, shows are packed, and the sky seems to be the limit. They're just waiting for that one person, label, entertainment manager to get them to the next level. That time can turn weeks into months, months into years, and before you know it, a lot of time has gone by. People start quitting or moving on to other things, and you're back at square one. Most of the next decade went like that for myself. Detox was always active for the most part. We made a very good 5-song EP called Visualize Consciousness. I'm still proud of that EP to this day, and it seemed most everyone that heard it liked it. We had an original sound. We were heavy, but far from a one-trick pony. We mixed up our songs well and always managed to be original without being boring. We had a few great gigs at that time, and we were on the Homegrown Show on KMOP 92.3, the same station that Mike Collada was working for about 6 years prior when he introduced Unchained at the Moby Grape. Ironically, Bruce from Unchained was now the radio DJ that invited us on the show. It ended up being like winning the lottery for me, as I met Alice, my beautiful wife of 18 years as I type this, through that radio appearance. We didn't get married until 10 years after that interview, but that's definitely another story for another day. So, on we went, writing songs, playing gigs, working full-time jobs, members coming and going, and coming back again. I was in my younger 20s, and the other guys their mid-20s. Slowly, our pack of friends were fading away and deep into their own lives and dreams. We practiced at the Alamo Rehearsal Studios, more popularly known by local musicians as Taco Bell because it looks like a gigantic old-school Taco Bell. It's an old hotel in a run-down industrial part of Las Vegas on Utah Street. If you've ever been a musician in Vegas, you most likely have practiced there at one time or another. When you walk in the front door, you go up 20 steep steps to the hallways where there are about 20 rooms with bands practicing in nearly all of them most of the time. My good friend Kirk is the landlord and a great musician. To this day, he still keeps that place in good shape and helps to keep rehearsing in Vegas affordable for many Vegas artists. During most of the 90s, we practiced there at least 4 days a week. We would drag equipment up and down the stairs when we had gigs, and we were just trying to be the tightest band we could be. I always felt like working and paying bills was just something to do until our band took off. I just always had that mindset, but my life was changing without me realizing it. I rarely stayed home and just practiced guitar. I really didn't get any better for years. Most of my playing was done at band practice where we would play a set of songs and most of the time work on something new at the end of the night. I was always actively writing songs, though. Dan liked to write his own lyrics, but Aaron and I would make most of the music. I wrote a lot of full songs, but Aaron made a lot of cool riffs, and we'd finish them together. We actually had a great chemistry in that band for writing that we never once really spoke about. It just happened. Just like when I was in 6th grade, a few times a year, a song idea would pop in my head at a random time. I would usually end up with a good song out of it. I guess that is one gift that I've always had. As months and years went by, I can't speak for the others, but I know I started feeling pressure. I really wanted to get somewhere. We would have little conflicts in the band over stupid shit. Eventually it boiled over into a bad fight one night, and for the first time, Robert was out of my musical journey. Sandra was back in on drums, and he brought a guitarist with him named Paul. Paul was a tall, long-haired, mid-20s guy in great shape. He was a really nice guy from Michigan, which made him much different than all of us desert rats. He also played guitar really well. Our styles complemented each other, and the combination of Sandro and him joining the band was a much-needed shot of adrenaline. We immediately started learning some of the old material, but also wrote a lot of new material. It really felt like a brand new band again. It was an exciting and soul-searching time in my life. I just went through a bad breakup with my longtime on-again, off-again girlfriend. I still had total faith in making it in the music industry, but I was also thinking about the reality of possibly not making it, and started making some decisions to set up a plan B in life. The other guys were all about 4 years older than me, and they were already making similar moves. I sometimes resented that about them. I felt a little like they were closing off some of our options for getting somewhere. Like, how can you leave a career to go on a small tour, or leave a wife and/or kids? Every time a practice was canceled or occasionally a gig couldn't get played because of this, it would kind of piss me off. I always felt like I took things more seriously than they did. I felt that way about all the bands I was in. I don't know if it was true or not, but that's how I felt. I spent more than a few nights putting flyers out by myself because someone had to work early or just didn't feel like doing it. I truly was very driven for many years and never had second thoughts. But my dad's words kept echoing in my mind, and by now I was starting to see a pattern that when I went against my parents' advice, I usually had a negative outcome. So now I started thinking it's probably best to hedge my rock star dream bets just a tad. It was the early to mid-90s now. Music and style were changing. The glam metal days that were big when I was in Ragdoll were pretty much over. Grunge music had taken its place as the mainstream hard rock choice for the masses. This didn't really hurt Detox, though. We were always pretty much our own animal. Not quite thrash, definitely not straight hard rock, just basically heavy in different ways from song to song. There was no Detox song template, the way that a band like AC/DC has always had. That's definitely not meant as a knock on AC/DC, one of the most iconic rock bands in history. I'm just saying that grunge definitely didn't kill us the way it did other bands at that time. Style had changed a lot also. Metallica came out and they all cut their hair off, much to the chagrin of the metal purists, but they had much success with it. It definitely made it to where wanting to be a metal musician no longer meant that long hair was mandatory. Believe it or not, this was very tough mentally for me to deal with. Having long hair since I was 14 years old was an absolute must. I turned down a handful of much better job opportunities because of it. I didn't even consider the notion. It was not happening. To me, cutting my hair off was literally giving up on music. I know this seems insane to those of you that didn't walk in my shoes at the time, but believe you me, the struggle was real. With the exception of being at a concert, playing a gig, or when I went to the Sunset Strip, having long hair as a guy is like being any minority among a majority of others that aren't like you. You're often stereotyped as some sort of burnout stoner loser and can literally flip people out when you prove to be literate, even in the most minute way. Over time, I expected this attitude from much of society. I often would get turned down for jobs when I was the obvious choice. People would often assume I was the one to score drugs from. I had a manager at my first casino job ask me if I knew how to pass a drug test. I think I can speak for a lot of us so-called stoners when I say you eventually end up having an attitude of fuck the world, or FTW, as you may have seen before. Through my eyes, that doesn't mean I don't want to be a part of the world. Rather, it means I'm going to do what I need to and succeed any way I have to. I'll put my hair up in a hat. I'll put it in a ponytail or slick it back. But the second I'm back on my time, I'm going to grab a guitar and go do something all your degrees and fancy suits can't do. I'm going to get a high that you can't buy, and I'm going to have a great time doing it. Now, with that being said, when the first job offer came in for what most people would say was a good entry-level position in a field I was interested in, I went to the same girl who cut my hair for many years and told her to whack it all off. I literally handed her a photo of Mark McGrath from the band Sugar Ray and said, "Cut it like that, dude." And that was that. Almost immediately, the weird stares I was so used to when I would walk into a room throughout my life were gone. The managers and bosses spoke to me with much more respect. And all the stoners that didn't know me were very surprised to find out I played guitar in a metal band like Detox because I was so clean cut. I just could never win. So now I'm clean cut, single, the band has transformed into a different type of animal, I'm working a new job, and I'm writing for a magazine called Picks and Sticks that was started by my friend Kirk, who owns the Alamo. I was getting really into working out and feeling really good. With Paul in the band, I was getting better at guitar again. I always tried harder with another guitarist in the band. Not that I was trying to compete, it was just inspiring to have a musical partner in crime. The band started making a small army of new friends, various co-workers and friends of friends that would hang out at practice with us and help us out on gig nights. It was a great time, sort of like the old days. I was really excited about music again in a big way. Right around that time, we had a friend named Tim that was one of Dan's best friends from work. Tim was a really creative guy, played guitar, and wrote songs. Sometimes after band practice, we'd jam with him on some of his riffs. He started singing backups during practice one night, and it sounded awesome. He had a really good Pantera-style voice, and it complemented what Dan was doing in a very cool way. So we kept trying it on more songs, and eventually he and Dan split some of the verses up. We decided to make Tim, or Stimmy, as we often called him, a member. It was a crazy lineup that nobody was doing yet. A metal-type band with 2 singers, and it made for a really energetic gig when we played live. Tim was a ball of energy and went ballistic on stage, which made Dan go ballistic, and the overall result was pretty entertaining. A fair amount of our Detox friends were not into it. I couldn't get mad about that. It was their opinion, and we definitely were no longer the band that made the Visualize Consciousness EP. For better or worse, we morphed into something quite a bit different, and we definitely picked up some new friends where others might have dropped off. After learning there was a moderately successful California punk band called Detox a few years before us, we changed our name to Sick. We started playing some gigs with that lineup, and it went the same as usual. Most were good, some were great, and some were bad. We recorded a 6-song EP called Violence Settles Everything that came out really well for the most part, but we still had no real direction for the next step. The world was changing over around that time, and most things were going online. It was a gradual shift that I was unaware of at first. I didn't buy a computer. I was slow to give up my pager for a cell phone, and I was still buying CDs when a lot of people were starting to use MP3 players and iPods. My brother Steve was in on the computer online craze pretty early on, and he was always a big supporter of my different music endeavors. It made sense, being that his influence is what got me into this mess in the first place. He put all the songs from Violence Settles Everything on mp3.com, which was similar to Spotify at that time. To our surprise, 2 of the songs cracked the top 10 list of the grindcore genre, and we were up there for months, next to pretty big names like Slipknot and DRI. That was very exciting to us. I always thought we would be successful if we could just get heard by the masses that listened to the music we were playing. Year after year after year, KOMP and Extreme Radio would break a few new heavy bands that would go on to be successful. I would always compare their songs to ours, and in my extremely biased opinion, I always thought if we had that kind of production and marketing with our songs and our band, we could do the same thing. The response from mp3.com at least was proving my theory that when our music was up against some of the best in our genre, we could still hold our own. That mattered a lot to me and completely fueled my fire again. This was still before social media, and nobody was used to getting smashed online by haters. So when my brother Steve also added us onto a site called GarageBand.com, that was a wild experience. This GarageBand.com has nothing to do with the app on Apple products. This was long before that. It was a site where an artist can put their music on, and it would be critiqued by other artists and listeners. They would rate the overall sound, rate each member, production, etc. They could leave comments as well. We had a fair share of reviews, and they were overwhelmingly positive. A very small percentage of haters, and a lot of people that said they would buy it. It was a huge source of validation to me. Our song, Suicide, won Metal Song of the Week, and that was out of thousands of entries in our genre worldwide. Most musicians are a bit insecure about their work. Even very successful artists can be tilted by a bad review. You remember the bad ones way more than the good ones. It's soul-crushing when someone destroys what you worked so hard on and which means so much to you. And the worst part is that someone's opinion of a band is really not up for discussion. There's no fact involved. It's 100% that person's taste. When it comes to music, one man's garbage truly is another man's treasure, and vice versa. We had that momentum going for us, and we had at least 2 full albums of what I would consider very good songs. We were playing some pretty decent gigs and writing even more songs, and I was really excited about it. We had one gig at a place called Jimmy Murphy's on Charleston Boulevard and Jones Boulevard that I personally had a lot to do with organizing. I found a great band from NYC that just moved here and asked them to play it with us. They were called Face Down, and I liked them a lot. I thought our 2 bands would go well together and our followings would probably get along. We did a lot of the old-school guerrilla marketing for this show, passing out flyers everywhere that had anything hard rock related going on for 3 weeks prior to the show, and it paid off. We had a really good crowd show up to a place that wasn't popular for that type of show, and both bands did great. It was a show I'll never forget. I literally was 100% lost in the music up there. I had no anxiety about playing, wasn't thinking about the crowd or if we'd fuck songs up, just felt the music with all of my soul. It was the closest thing to an out-of-body experience I ever had. I poured every bit of frustration and love for music out of my body at the same time, and it was true magic. Unfortunately, I never reached that type of feeling again. And what happened that night at the main gate, when I suddenly couldn't play for a few seconds, started to happen a lot. At first, I would just drop my pick sometimes during a gig and have to finish a song without one. It wasn't too bad, but the horror of it would make it worse. And then I'd drop it again. I could play without a pick decently enough, so most people wouldn't notice, but it started happening every gig, and sometimes to the point where I'd just give up even trying to play with a pick at all. I started getting better and better at playing without a pick, because every gig it would happen to me. It never happened at practice or anywhere else, but I was usually sitting down when I was playing at practice or home. I thought that was the problem at first, but when I would stand at practice, my back would start killing me, and that's why I was sitting in the first place. It was the beginning of about 2 years of major mental and physical trauma for me. I was working out hard and feeling good, but my legs and biceps seemed to be weak. I would be walking and just fall, for no reason at all. I could lift a good amount of weight with my triceps and barely lift anything with my biceps. I was really stressing out about the pick dropping thing, to the point where I no longer looked forward to playing gigs. We would get a gig, and I'd be excited, and then a mental wave would hit me like a tsunami when I started thinking about the whole pick thing. It absolutely fucking sucked in every way possible. This guitar and music thing that I'd always loved and went all in for with my life was slowly being taken away from me. I didn't know why. I didn't talk about it. The band never really mentioned it, but I knew they must have when I wasn't around. It was a tough time for me, to be sure. What was I going to be if it wasn't a guitarist and songwriter? This meant I had nothing special about me at all. That's how I felt inside at the time, but nobody knew it. The whole ordeal came to a head at a gig we had at Kirk's club called The Ozone. We were playing with a few other bands, and we had the last slot. There was a decent crowd, and we were excited to go on and have a great show. About 2 minutes into our first song, I dropped my pick. Then I felt my whole body, from my waist down, just feel numb. My legs felt like rubber. If you've ever been on a treadmill or Stairmaster for a long time and then get off of the machine, sometimes your legs are numb for a few steps after you walk off. My legs felt like that, but much worse. I went to grab another pick, and my knees just buckled, and I hit the floor hard. It was a nightmare. The band quit playing. I remember scrambling and literally crawling to the drum riser so I could prop myself up and sit down. The whole time my guitar was around my neck, making all kinds of fucked up noise. I remember Dan running over and trying to help me get settled. I was so overwhelmed with emotions. I was embarrassed and scared at the same time, and then I was pissed off. I was so mad that I was going through this, and I even messed my amp up somehow and it totally died. I remember looking at the crowd, and there was total concern on their faces. After a few minutes of chaos, somebody had my amp working again. I had a pick and started to check if my guitar was in tune while I was still sitting on the drum riser. I started to get up, and I think Dan told me to just stay there and play, Goldstein. Everyone called me Goldstein or Goldy. I always believed the show must go on, and on we went. I played the rest of the set sitting down, not dropping my pick, and actually enjoying playing a live show again for the first time in 2 years. The crowd cheered us on and gave me much love afterwards. We made the best of a bad situation. It was something I had to start getting very used to. I told the guys that I would have to play gigs sitting down from here on out. This was a very different thing. There were no guitarists doing that at the time that I'm aware of, and even now, some 20 years later, I only know of the kid from Glee in a wheelchair, Jason Sukoff from CWOTD, and the guitarist in Portugal, The Man. It was definitely a bit of an oddity to have a guitar player sitting down on stage, but to their credit, the other guys were supportive. And after a few gigs with me sitting down, I think everyone would agree that it was more of an advantage than a disadvantage to us. Maybe the combination of 2 singers and a lead guitarist sitting on stage separated us from the herd a little bit. We went on playing shows, writing songs, and we even taped a half-hour TV show called Totally Banned for the UNLV television station. Oddly enough, that show was replayed often, and people would occasionally recognize me from that for about a year after the fact. I guess the power of TV is real. Things went that way for quite a while. Then, the same type of drama that always started in my other bands reared its ugly head. I could write another book on all the plots and subplots of the final days of Sick. After a band meeting in October of 2001, I decided it was time to move on. I was looking at the possibilities of our band making it at that point, and I realized it was going to be a constant struggle. I really didn't think our friendships were strong enough to endure it at that point. We all had people counting on us or steady jobs, and Alice and I were newly married with a new business that we wanted to grow. I also found out that my falling down, back pain, and pick dropping was because of a progressive neurological disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT, and I wasn't really sure what my future was going to bring physically. So, Halloween night at the Cheyenne Saloon was my last gig with Sick, and the night that the music died for me. At least that's how it seemed. Chapter 8. Remission. After that final gig, I felt good with my decision. I thought about it through the whole month of October, and I walked through all the different scenarios in my head. I knew I was doing the right thing, and was confident that I wouldn't regret it. It was a very final break. I didn't speak to anyone in the band for many years. It was literally like a bitter divorce. No words were spoken. It was just done. I had known Dan since I was like 12 years old, and I never saw him again. We spoke on Facebook one time as part of a group text about 10 years later, and we had such a bitter fight within minutes, we never spoke again. I guess when it's over, it's indeed over. Alice and I went on with our new life and started building up our business. It was a freeing feeling to not care about the band any longer and not have to rush from work to practice and back to work again. For so long, making it in music was the only thing I really cared about. It affected all of my decisions. The last few months the band was together was tense. There was always an ugly feeling in the room, and it was relieving to not have that energy around me any longer. I had a lot of terrible and challenging things happen in that year. 2002 was very rough on me. CMT hits you hardest between the ages of 27 and 32. I was 28 and starting to decline pretty bad. It was getting harder and harder to walk. Even stepping off a curb to get in your car was challenging, and I was having a very hard time physically. Then, one morning in July of 2002, I answered a call from my mom. Instead of hearing her always cheerful voice on the other line, I heard a tone in her voice that was almost unrecognizable. Before she even said it, and even though there was really no reason to even think it at that time, I knew that my dad had died. He was literally shooting three-pointers on the basketball court the day before. Alice and I scurried out the door and sped over to my parents' condo that was about 10 miles away. I walked in the door, stumbled up the stairs, and hurried through the little hallway that led to my parents' bedroom. When I walked through the door, I saw my dad lying on his back, completely lifeless. It was horrific. At that point, I only had a handful of people I had known die. I only saw death a few times at a funeral with an open casket, with the deceased presented in a peaceful, almost pleasant state. This was my first time really seeing death in a person. And it was my dad. This guy that I've had a million ups and downs with through the years. I was finally at this great place with him, and now he was gone. And there was nothing I could do about it. Seeing death like that was so ugly to me. I don't think I could ever get used to that. I learned a lot that day about reality and life. It was definitely transforming, and any type of carefree attitude on life that I still had within me was gone in that moment. When the coroner showed up at the house, my mom was pretty much hysterical. She didn't want them to take his body. The coroner didn't want her there to see them load my father up. It was gut-wrenchingly sad. I never saw my mom act illogically, but she was absolutely crushed, and it just changed her forever. A few minutes after my dad was loaded into the coroner's van, I heard the coroner answer his phone and tell someone that he had a few more stops and then he could meet them for lunch. It was a sobering comment to me. I was thinking of all the trials and tribulations my dad had gone through in his life, only to be nothing more in the end than another stop on somebody's daily route. From the time I woke up to Mom's call to the moment of the coroner's call, I grew up quite a bit that day. It made me much more grateful for every day I'm still around. I hated the thought of my mom coming home to an empty house every night, so Alice and I left our place and moved in with her. Shortly after my dad was put to rest, I was in a car accident with a drunk driver. It wasn't a huge crash by any means, but it did give me whiplash, and because of my CMT, it led to me never being able to walk on my own again. Relatively soon after that, my mom decided to move back to New Jersey. That's where the other 95% of our family lives. She always wanted to go back, but my dad was never leaving Vegas. As you can see, 2002 was not good to me at all. In a matter of about a year, I quit music, lost my dad, lost my ability to walk, and my mom moved across the country. If it wasn't for Alice being the absolute best wife and best friend anyone could ask for, I truly don't know what I would have done. She has always been there for me 1,000% of the way, and we always get through everything together. I love her with all of my heart and soul. Chapter 9. Incurable. The next decade or so was all about Alice and I running our business and constantly trying new business ideas and projects. We've had a lot of fun times and met a lot of people from various backgrounds. My physical condition continued to get worse for a few years. I went from using a walker to a scooter to an electric power chair to needing to wear oxygen. That's about where I've been for roughly 8 years now. I feel pretty good most days, and Alice and I manage to do us very well. We just make the best of it most of the time, and I'm forever grateful to have her by my side. For at least 5 years, I really didn't even think about music. I just had no desire at all, like it didn't even exist. I listened while driving around and went to a concert here and there, but that was the extent of it. I had guitars laying around and never touched them. I would still have original songs pop in my head a few times a year, but I just didn't care. Then I remember listening to a Linkin Park song on the radio and feeling some inspiration to learn how to play it. I just really liked it and thought it would be fun to get my guitar and jam with it. So when I got home, I grabbed my guitar, turned the song on, went to start playing it, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I guess that's what not playing for 5 years will do to you. It was beyond that, though. With CMT, it's very important to keep doing what you can do pretty much daily. If you don't, you will lose the ability pretty fast, and it's very hard to get it back. I figured out that I couldn't play power chords or do any soloing type stuff, but I could play the major chords like G, D, E, and C pretty easily. So I started playing my acoustic a lot more often. I started trying to sing while I played, and I really started to like it. I felt a major rush from it. It was helping me breathe better when I would sing, and I felt very connected to the songs I would do. I started thinking of all the songs that were popping in my head over the last 10 years that I just ignored, and I slowly started writing them out. Alice would often say, "That sounds good," and chill out with me for a little private concert. It was nice to have this little escape back into my life, and I was really excited to be writing songs again. My soul needed it. It's definitely one of those things I'm meant to do. I then started playing with an app called GarageBand that's available on Apple products, and that's when my whole music world came back to me. Now I was able to record demos, and I had a whole arsenal of instruments that I could easily record by touching buttons on the screen. If I didn't have the music knowledge I have, it wouldn't be as effective. Now I'm able to write all kinds of songs, things I could never do before. Alice started her own entertainment company. Through that company, I was able to meet a lot of really great musicians. I'm not a name dropper, but I have been able to meet literally dozens of musicians I grew up listening to. A few of them were actually cool enough to learn some of my songs and record them. I had one placed on a reality show that aired for about 3 million viewers. I've had the pleasure of talking with some of these guys that have had platinum albums and who have toured for decades. Some have played and still play arenas all over the world. Some were big for a time and now struggle to get by, and between them, I've heard all the stories, good, bad, and sometimes very ugly. After talking to all these guys and hearing stories, I started to realize that all musicians have one thing in common. We've all been inspired by something early on that made us want to play music, and once it's in your blood, it never, ever truly leaves. There's always that bit of insecurity. Even the cocky ones are pretty much just hiding insecurity. It's strange to create a song and like what you made, but you also need that validation, and imagine if a song gets to the wrong person first. Think of a really successful band that you don't like. We all have them. Some huge band that makes you scratch your head and you just can't hear what others are so impressed by. Now think of how many times great bands and artists are passed on because the wrong person heard them. That's the type of thing that can make or break a musician's professional life. It's a very crazy world to try to break into. I think most people would probably not want their kids to pursue a life in music. It's definitely not a safe route to take in life, and it's hard to go halfway with something that is so competitive. On the other hand, the magical connection that I feel when playing an original song, and it sounds just like I heard it in my head, is pretty much unmatched by anything else. You just can't ever know it until it happens. And when you have that feeling in front of an appreciative crowd, it's a truly special thing. It is something I'm very happy I was able to experience. I'll leave you with this. I started my musical journey as a 13-year-old kid that loved metal music and wanted to be a rock star. I definitely fell short of that goal, but music was still a very positive thing in my life. It didn't pay my bills, but it gave me the confidence and drive to make sure the bills did get paid. I always felt I was a part of something, and at least had a shot at doing something big. And now, at 45, and confined to a power chair, I still get excited when I make a new song, and it brings me back to that same spirit I had when I was 13. Rock on, kids. I would like to thank you for listening to Music Won't Pay the Bills, and I thought it would be an appropriate time to actually listen to a track that I recently wrote and recorded with a group of musicians that also call Las Vegas home. After writing this book, I decided to create an entire theater production based on the mindset of the aspiring musician. This is the song that will be the finale of the show and is titled, yes, you guessed it, Music Won't Pay the Bills. I would like to thank my wonderful wife, Alice Goldstein, and my dear friend, Mike Varney, for organizing this whole recording project. It was a great birthday present that I'll never forget. I would like to thank all of the musicians and friends that brought my vision to life. Here's a list of the musicians that played on it and where you can find them online. I strongly suggest checking them out. All of them have been creating great music for many years. Phil Varone, drums. www.philvarone.com. Stoney Curtis, lead guitars. StoneyCurtisBand.com. Mike Varney, rhythm and lead guitars. ShrapnelRecords.com. Hugo Castillo, rhythm guitar. AmericanRivieraRecords.com. Barry Barnes, bass. StoneyCurtisBand.com. Chris Logan, vocals. Jason Walker, vocals. At Jason Walker and the Majestic 12. That's the number 12. Mariah Baldwin, vocals. At Mojave Sun Band. Paul Anthony, vocals. www.systemecband.com. Tyler Lawson, vocals. AlligatorBlood.com. Recorded at The Counts, Desert Moon Studios, DesertMoondance.com. Additional recording, mixing, and mastering at American Riviera Records, AmericanRivieraRecords.com.
Glance into the music business, the average person sees fame, fortune, and everything that goes with it. In reality, record sales have been declining at an alarming rate. The effects are catastrophic. Record store closures, record company closures, and band breakups. More shockingly, streaming statistics, with 5 million streams paying out less than $200 in royalties. Musicians are left answering the same question: how do I pay the bills?
That guitar down, don't make another sound.
You'll be lost and never found.
Just keep that shit on roll. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 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 You'll be stuck in a rut. Don't let it in your guts.
Shedding tears until you drown.
Every time. Music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. All these tortured souls, and round they go.
Where they stop, I'll probably know.
Broken and alone. Music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. Music won't pay the bill. Music won't pay the bills, but music gives me chills. You can't buy these skills, you can't take a pill. 'Cause it's a adrenaline injection, exceeds all projections. When the club's packed, we rock the track. It's a groove infection, a nuclear detection, a Viagra-filled direction, a life without rejection. I'm the one exception. Music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill. Music won't pay the bill. 'Cause music won't pay the bill.
This has been Music Won't Pay the Bills, an autobiographical journey through the ups, downs, and all-around thought process of an aspiring musician. Written by Goldy Jr., narrated by Mike Chadwick. Copyright 2019 by Danny Goldstein. Production copyright by Danny Goldstein.